Hey guys, you are watching your anime world. How are you all? Please support to subscribe this channel for watching new interesting stories. So in this video, we will see what if Deku became a villain for revenge and redemption. Here is short summary. Izuku been pushed around way too many times and has been bullied, scorned, and casted aside his entire life. Been told he can't amount to anything, and even told to kill himself. What people didn't know is that he was a natural super genius who had a great talent for creating and engineering, but nobody ever saw through his quirklessness. Now armed with all kinds of super advanced technology and weapons, along with an army of yellow minions, he now plans on getting his revenge by becoming the world's ultimate villain. Oh, but there's one problem. After accidentally saving a white-haired little girl, with a horn that can reverse time, who for some reason calls him Papa, as well as 3 other children who look up to him as a sort of father figure. He asks himself if he could truly be a villain. But before we start, if you want more stuff like this, then be sure to subscribe and like this video. And if possible, share this video with your friends. Now let's start the story. Izuku Midoriya wanted to be a hero more than anyone else. He really did. He had the heart, the will, the smarts, the natural genius and talent. But there was one problem, however: he was quirkless. And thus, people would tend to overlook his hidden talents and untapped potential. But nonetheless, he was determined to not let his condition get in his way and define him. Even if he was scorned, shunned away, bullied, mocked, ridiculed, put down and pushed around for his heroic dream, Izuku would grit his teeth and face forward. He would be relentless in the pursuit of his heroic dream, carrying on a willful spirit. But like any other spirit, if you beat it down long and hard enough, they too can break. And to say that Izuku Midoriya had a bad life would be an understatement. Ever since he was quirkless, it appeared that everything good in his life that made him safe, happy and welcome took a big nosedive. His dad left him, his mother basically stopped caring for him, friends started turning into enemies, and his childhood friend turned into his bully and tormentor for the rest of his life after Izuku turned 4 years old. It's as if God himself said, "Yep, those 4 years of your life would be the only time that you'd be happy. Now enjoy hell for the rest of your life." But Izuku wasn't going to let that happen. He will be going to be a hero, he will fulfill his dreams and ambitions, and he will be actually happy. He was determined to find some kind of meaningful purpose for his life. He will prove his worth. He will, right. As Izuku Midoriya sat in his homeroom class at Aldera Junior High, the noise around him was deafening. Quirk use, loud and disruptive behavior were the norm in the classroom, and the teacher didn't care one bit. Flames crackled from one student's hands, another's skin hardened like stone, and a third grew extra limbs, all adding to the cacophony. Izuku kept his head down, scribbling in his notebook, trying to focus on anything other than the chaos around him. His notebook was his sanctuary, filled with detailed notes on quirks, hero strategies, and even rough sketches of inventions he'd dreamt up. Though he knew he'd never use a quirk himself, he couldn't help but analyze the ones he saw, jotting down weaknesses and potential counters. His inventive mind was always at work, even in the most distracting environments. But as he wrote, a flicker of doubt crossed his mind. What's the point? He wondered, staring at the page. No one cares about what I can do. The notebook had become a testament to his loneliness, filled with thoughts and ideas he'd never get to share. Eventually, when the teacher entered and pulled out the career forms, the buzz died down. Now then, you're all third years, so it's time for you all to start thinking seriously about your futures. The teacher announced, looking through the forms in his hand. Normally, I would hand out these career forms. However, he then threw the papers in the air with a flourish. I know you all want to be heroes. There was a great uproar from the rest of the class. Flamethrower arms were lit, skins were hardening, muscles were growing eyeballs, and fingers and necks were extending. In the midst of the chaos sat a spiky-haired blonde with a cocksure grin, lounging lazily in his chair with his feet kicked up on his desk. "Come on, teach. Don't lump me in with the rest of these extras," Katsuki Bakugo arrogantly bragged, hands in his pockets. The rest of the class turned its ire on him, but he responded with equal disdain. He then went on a flaunting tirade about how he was going to be the #1 hero, surpassing even All Might. Izuku clenched his pencil tighter, his hand trembling slightly. His eyes flicked from his notebook to Bakugo, and then back again. Kachan, he thought, his chest tightening. Once, they had been friends. Izuku had admired him, even looked up to him. But now, Bakugo was just another reminder of everything Izuku wasn't and could never be. The teacher chuckled at Bakugo's bravado, not bothering to rein in the chaos. Yes, Bakugo, you've certainly got the talent. But remember, it takes more than just a strong quirk to be a hero. Izuku felt a pang of bitterness. What about those of us without a quirk? He thought, but he didn't say it out loud. He never did. Instead, he lowered his head further, hoping to disappear into his notebook, his mind whirring with ideas that would never see the light of day. The class's chaos quickly silenced when the teacher offhandedly mentioned, "Oh yes, Midoriya. You applied for UA as well, didn't you?" Everyone immediately froze, their eyes zeroing in on the nervous green-haired boy who flinched at the unwanted attention. PFF'd. Ha 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 ha. Ha 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 ha. Midoriya. Ha. You're kidding, right? There's no way he's getting into the hero course without a quirk. The entire classroom burst into ridiculing, disbelieving laughter. Izuku, trying to muster some courage, stammered, "Actually, they got rid of that rule. I could be the first one." His words were met with more laughter, and Bakugo exploded his desk, throwing Izuku to the floor. "Still, after all this time, you're still trying to compete with me. Wake up and realize how worthless you are, Deku." Bakugo growled, approaching him with eyes blazing in fury. Izuku began crawling back to the wall behind him in fear, pitifully trying to calm the angrier boy. "Listen up, Deku, you're even worse than the rest of these damn rejects, you quirkless wannabe." Bakugo snarled, his hands sparking with his quirk. The school bell rang, preventing things from escalating further, and the teacher finally decided to step in and try to calm the class down. "All right, class, settle down, the bell just rang. And Midoriya, clean up your desk afterward," the teacher ordered, not caring that Izuku had just been attacked. Izuku, his head hung low, replied in a monotone voice, "Yes, sir." His hands shook slightly from how hard he was clenching them. As he got up, he tried his best to hide his anger and frustration at the unfair treatment he received every day. The school day went on, normally, if that was what one could call Izuku's life situation. Being a social pariah was not a pleasant experience, but Izuku's determination to fulfill his dream remained steadfast. While everyone else began packing up their things and leaving after the school day had ended, Izuku stayed behind. He was discreetly making some final touches on his very first invention inside his bag, his freeze ray, something he had been building since he was 7. If going to the hero course through the normal exam didn't work, then he would do so from the support course. From the corner of his eye, Izuku saw Bakugo and his lackeys approaching. Quickly, he zipped up his bag and began acting like he was about to leave. Unfortunately, they caught up to him first. Aside from Bakugo, Izuku hadn't bothered to learn the names of his 2 extras that were always by his side. So, Izuku opted to just call them Minion #1 foot and Minion number 2. "Hey, Midoriya, what's the rush?" Minion number 1 called out. "Yeah, it's not like you have anyone to hang out with," Minion number 2 followed up. Izuku stuttered, trying to explain himself and get out of this situation. I was just..." But before he could finish, Bakugo quickly snatched Izuku's notebook from his hands and read it out loud, "Hero Quirk Analysis No. 13 feet. Why do you even have this shit? You should know by now that a quirkless bastard like you could never be a hero." The arrogant blonde sneered, watching Izuku flail in a desperate attempt to get his notebook back. I can still be a hero. Now give it back," Izuku pleaded, his voice shaky but determined. "You can't get accepted into the hero course just by studying, Midoriya," Minion number 2 said bluntly as Minion number 1 laughed at the absurd idea of Izuku applying for the hero course. Eventually, Bakugo lowered his arm and pretended to hand Izuku his notebook back. "Fine, you want it so bad. Here you go." Izuku almost looked hopeful. However, As he reached out to grab his notebook, Bakugo used his explosive quirk to fry the notebook, sending a wave of fear through Izuku. The charred remains of the notebook were then thrown out the window. Bakugo placed a hand on Izuku's shoulder, smoke emanating from his palm and lightly burning the green-haired boy. "Listen here and listen closely. Don't even think about applying to UA, Deku," Bakugo threatened, his voice low and menacing. Izuku could do nothing but meekly nod in fear. After ensuring the threat was understood, Bakugo and his minions turned to leave. But not before Bakugo delivered one final blow. "You know, if you want to be a hero that badly, here's an advice. Why don't you take a swan dive off a roof and pray for a quirk in your next life?" Bakugo and his two minions laughed cruelly as they exited the classroom. Izuku stood motionlessly, his eyes darkening and his fists clenched tightly. There was a certain glimmer in his eyes after Bakugo's parting words. He snapped his head around, expecting Bakugo and his two minions to still be standing by the door, but they had already left. Izuku was incredibly tempted to use his freeze ray on him right then and there. To freeze him for eternity and make him suffer for everything he had done to him, or use him as his lab rat to test his many other deadly inventions on. In fact, Izuku was already thinking about building an invention that would take away Bakugo's quirk permanently since he loved it so much. A small, devious smile subconsciously formed upon his lips. Should he? The thought was intoxicating. The idea of making Bakugo powerless, of showing him what it felt like to be stripped of everything, made Izuku's heart race. To be the one on the other end of the stick for once. But then, he caught his reflection in the window. The dark look in his eyes, the twisted smile. It wasn't him. It wasn't the hero he aspired to be. He shook his head and unclenched his fists, forcing himself to calm down. "All right, calm down, Izuku. Heroes don't think about revenge," he reminded himself, taking a deep breath to steady his nerves. He couldn't let thoughts like that consume him, not when he still had a dream to chase. Izuku gathered his things and left the classroom, the weight of Bakugo's words still pressing heavily on his mind. After retrieving his fried notebook from a fish pond, Izuku began to walk home from school in a dampened mood. He was having a bad day, but he tried to keep his spirits up. To smile through the pain and through any situation, no matter how bad, like his idol All Might would do. As he walks out the school gates, he wonders where to go. He sighs as he really doesn't want to go home, knowing that his mother is most likely there. Neither people would be too happy to see each other at all. Their interactions as well as their relationship had become strained ever since Izuku was conditioned quirkless, and he wasn't looking forward to any confrontation with her. Lost in his thoughts, he nearly missed the familiar trio of small, yellow figures wearing blue overalls that bounded up to him, their vibrant energy a stark contrast to his gloomy state. "Hey, big boss, EU." Their cheerful calls and energetic greetings cut through the heavy atmosphere, drawing a reluctant smile from Izuku. The absurdity of their unyielding optimism was a small but welcome distraction. Despite his somber mood, he couldn't help but be slightly uplifted by their presence. "Ah, hey, it's you guys again." Izuku greeted the small trio with genuine enthusiasm as he approached them. The minions, as they called themselves, had become a curious, interesting and unexpected part of his life. Izuku remembered their first encounter vividly. It all began a week ago when he had sneaked into an abandoned building to test out his gadgets and inventions. The building was deserted, so he hoped that it didn't count as trespassing. Inside, he had set up a makeshift lab to experiment with his support items and weapons, everything from grenades and unique blasters to tear gas, knockout gas, easy but complex handcuffs, and, of course, his prized freeze ray. His goal was to see how these tools could be used to capture villains when he tries for the UA support course exam. However, when testing them out, he decided to have some fun with it by acting like hero by performing grandiose dramatics, attempting to imitate All Might's bravado when he fights villains. Or even trying to copy both Bakugo and All Might by saying things like, "Everyone beware, for I am here, or die." And even trying to laugh like All Might. He had accidentally made himself look like a villain instead. And he supposes that the minions had watched him the whole time, and that was what had drawn the minions to him, as they really want to serve a villain and want him to be a villain for whatever reason. Izuku doesn't know how to break it down to them that he intends to be a hero. Izuku had initially thought the minions were merely bizarre-looking mutants, speaking in a foreign language that even he couldn't decipher. Their strange appearances and peculiar behavior had made him see them as oddities rather than anything more. When he returned to the abandoned building, he was utterly astonished to find not just the trio but an entire damn society of minions. The building, which he had thought was abandoned, was teeming with these yellow creatures. It was like stumbling upon a hidden army, all of them working in unison, already making their way to fix the building. The realization that there was a whole society of these minions, each with their own personalities and specialties, was both overwhelming and intriguing. So, yeah, that's how they met, and ever since then, the minions had stuck to his side like unbreakable glue. Izuku, Ho Aka, Ham Yakyub, the trio of minions, whom Izuku's learned their names to be Kevin, Stuart, and Bob, began to surround him and basically began to fanboy and coddle over him while also babbling excitedly in their own language. Izuku himself finds it a bit uncomfortable, but he appreciates the sentiment nonetheless. "Thanks, guys, missed you too," he said as his mood actually started to lighten up, especially after having a hard day today. Suddenly, the tallest minion, Kevin, spoke up. "Izuku, we kale ata da nunu too." "Surprise," he said eagerly, with Stuart and Bob nodding enthusiastically beside him. See, they chimed in, their excitement contagious. Izuku, still struggling to understand their language, recognized the English word, surprise. "Surprise, you have a surprise for me?" he asked, a bit puzzled but curious. The trio nodded vigorously, and before he knew it, they were dragging him by the hand. "What the, whoa," Izuku exclaimed as the smallest minion, Bob, pulled on his arm with surprising strength. Come, they urged, their excitement only growing. They led him to a secluded alleyway, and when they finally stopped, Izuku's eyes widened in shock at what he saw. Ta-da, Kevin, Stuart, and Bob chorused, revealing a heavily modified and upgraded armored motorbike. The bike had a sleek, sharp design with a massive thruster at the back, giving it an almost futuristic look. It had an on-the-nose design, with sleek lines and a black, gray and neon green color scheme that screamed, cool. "Whoa," Izuku breathed out, his eyes gleaming with amazement. The bike looked like something out of a high-tech action movie, and it was metal as all hell. What?" Izuku stammered, still trying to process the sight before him. "Nunu too," Kevin declared proudly. "Wah, for me, I can't drive that. I'm way too young to drive," Izuku protested, his mind racing with a mix of excitement and panic, but mostly panic. Stuart, the one with a single eye, blew a raspberry. "PFF'd, Ben cares," he exclaimed, waving off Izuku's concern with a casual hand gesture. Izuku may not understand much of their minionese language, but he was pretty sure Stuart had just said, "Who cares?" Izuku continued to stare at the motorbike with widened eyes, unsure of what to do. He was about to protest further until Kevin nudged him with his elbow. "Come on, Takano to Quir too," Kevin urged with a mischievous grin. "MMMMH." Izuku made a noise as if he was someone trying to hold back on his temptations or addictions. "Intel. Ah, ha ha ha, woo woo, yeah." Izuku was now speeding through the empty streets, riding his new motorbike alongside the minions, all of them having the time of their lives. He made sure to put the big thruster in the back to good use, giving them a huge boost and making them go as fast as they could, leaving nothing but a trail of smoke behind. Now Izuku really hoped that UA didn't do background checks. Izuku continued speeding down the empty streets until he looked ahead and spotted a tunnel under a bridge. His eyes widened at the sight emerging from a manhole, a massive, liquid body of slime. "What is that?" Izuku yelled, pulling back on the throttle, trying to slow down. The sludge villain, who was in the middle of escaping from All Might, turned his eyes around, curious about the noise and racket coming from behind him. What the hell is, The villain's eyes bulged in shock as he saw Izuku and his minions speeding directly toward him. They all screamed in unison as Izuku crashed right into the body of the villain. The impact caused the villain's slime-like body to splatter apart all over the tunnel, while Izuku's motorbike skidded and crashed, sending him and the minions tumbling. Izuku and the minions eventually got up, dazed but thankfully unharmed. Izuku, who had been wearing a helmet, managed to avoid serious injury. The minions, somehow unscathed as usual, seemed as invincible as ever, something Izuku had already come to suspect after witnessing one of them take a flamethrower blast to the face without a scratch. Still, their well-being was always a concern for him. You guys all right?" Izuku asked with a groan, removing his helmet. Stuart, slumped over the crashed bike, groaned and raised a weak thumbs up. "Yaaa," he mumbled. Just as Izuku was about to get up and check on the others, an angry voice caught their attention. The sludge villain, who had reassembled his body after being splattered, loomed over them, his expression furious. "Oi, brat, what the hell was that? Do you have any idea who you just messed with?" The villain ranted, his gooey form shifting menacingly. Izuku's heart raced as he quickly assessed the situation, realizing he was in serious trouble. I'm so sorry, sir. I didn't mean to." Izuku tried to apologize, but the villain wasn't interested in hearing excuses. His slimy arm extended, rushing toward Izuku with malicious intent. Panic surged through Izuku as he scrambled to think of a solution. In a flash, he reached into his bag beside him and grabbed the freeze ray he'd been working on. Without hesitation, he aimed and fired at the villain, the ray emitting a bright, cold beam that instantly froze the villain's hand, stopping him in his tracks. The sudden halt caused the villain to stumble back in surprise. But Izuku didn't stop there. He fired again, this time freezing a larger portion of the villain's body. The sludge villain let out an enraged roar as the ice spread across his form, solidifying and immobilizing him further. Izuku, breathing heavily, took a step back, his heart pounding in his chest. He couldn't believe it, his invention had actually worked. But the moment of triumph was brief as he realized the danger still wasn't completely over. The villain eventually just disembodied the parts of his body that had been frozen and continuing to charge at the boy, enraged. Izuku continued to freeze him on the spot continuously, slowing him down while his mind raced as he tried to think of a different tactic. He used his other hand to pat his body and pockets all over, hoping to find another gadget or weapon of some sort. Unfortunately, he was too late as the sludge villain had gotten hold of the boy as well as the minions who tried to escape his grasp and began suffocating all of them. Izuku gasped for air as the sludge villain tightened his grip, the suffocating pressure making his vision blur. The minions struggled as well, their usual cheerful demeanor replaced with fear as they tried to wriggle free. Izuku's mind raced, panic taking over as he realized he was running out of options. The villain's laughter echoed in his ears, drowning out the pounding of his heart. "Don't worry, kid, I'm going to make sure this hurts," the villain taunted, his slime continuing to further surround Izuku and the minions. Desperation fueled Izuku's actions as he clawed at the sludge, trying to find any purchase, but it was no use. He could feel his strength waning, the world around him growing darker. Was this it? Was this how it was going to end? But just as the darkness began to close in, a powerful gust of wind swept through the tunnel, followed by a booming voice that shook the very ground. "Never fear, for I am here." Izuku's eyes widened in shock as he recognized the voice. All Might, the symbol of peace, had arrived. In one swift motion, All Might punched the sludge villain with such force that the villain's body was blown apart, freeing Izuku and the minions from his suffocating grasp. The sheer power of the punch caused the air to ripple, and the tunnel walls trembled under the might of the hero. Izuku and the minions were finally released, but All Might's punch had been so powerful that it knocked everyone out. When Izuku awoke, he found himself face to face with his lifelong idol, the #1 hero, All Might, who was gently but rapidly slapping his cheek, urging him to wake up. Any other time, Izuku would have been over the moon, fanboying over the fact that he was meeting the one and only All Might. But as soon as he came to his senses, his first thought was about the minions. "Kevin, Stuart, Bob, are you guys?" he started, his voice full of panic. He was cut off by the sound of All Might's hearty laughter. "Ha ha 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 ha, fear not, Young man. Your, small friends are safe as well. All Might reassured him, stepping aside to reveal the trio of minions rushing toward Izuku from behind his leg. Izuku. You're all right, Bob exclaimed in relief, his goggles shining with concern as he clung to Izuku's leg. Izuku breathed a sigh of relief, his heart finally settling as he patted Bob's head. Thank goodness, he muttered, still a bit dazed but overwhelmingly relieved. Kevin and Stuart joined Bob, their usual grins back in place as they stood beside their leader. Despite everything that had just happened, seeing All Might and the minions safe and sound brought Izuku a sense of comfort that he hadn't felt all day. All Might extended a hand to help Izuku to his feet. You did well, young man. And quite the peculiar companions you have, he said with a chuckle, watching as the minions began to jump around him, clearly impressed by the hero's power. Gee, thank you, All Might. I don't know what I would have done if you hadn't shown up. Izuku stammered, still in awe. All Might gave a hearty laugh, his presence radiating reassurance. It was no trouble at all. Just doing my duty as the symbol of peace. But tell me, are you hurt? Izuku shook his head, still feeling a bit sore but otherwise okay. No, I'm fine, thanks to you. The minions, now satisfied that Izuku was all right, began mimicking All Might's famous poses, much to the hero's amusement. You've got some lively friends here, All Might said, crouching down to get a better look at the minions. It's not every day I meet such unique little fellows. Izuku smiled, a warmth spreading through his chest. Despite the chaos, the day had taken an unexpectedly positive turn. Meeting All Might and knowing that the minions were safe filled him with hope and determination. Thank you, All Might, Izuku said, his voice full of sincerity. I'll never forget this. Very well then, I must leave. Crime waits for no one. Have a good day, young citizen. All Might bellowed, preparing to take his leave. But as he got ready to jump, Izuku's eyes widened in distress. There was one question he desperately needed to ask. Before he could process what was happening, All Might leapt into the air, taking Izuku with him. The minions called out to him in alarm, but Izuku was too focused to notice. His heart raced as he clung to his idol, his mind set on asking the most important question of his life. They landed on the roof of a building, and All Might immediately scolded the young man for his reckless action. You should be more careful. Jumping like that could have gotten you seriously hurt. All Might instructed Izuku to take the stairs down while he moved toward the edge of the roof. But Izuku couldn't let him go without an answer. Ignoring the reprimand, he followed All Might, words running through his mind like echoes of all the people who had discouraged him over the years. Summoning his courage, he finally blurted out, All Might, can someone like me, someone who doesn't have a quirk, still be a hero like you? All Might stopped in his tracks and turned to face the boy, his eyes meeting Izuku's, who was yearning for an answer. But before he could respond, All Might suddenly gave a painful grunt, clutching his side as he hunched over. Izuku, oblivious to what was happening, continued to speak, his voice filled with desperation. He talked about being teased for being quirkless, yet still wanting to save people with a smile. It wasn't until the steam cleared that Izuku looked up, his words catching in his throat. His eyes widened in shock as he saw the frail, skeletal figure standing where All Might should have been. What happened to you? Izuku stammered, completely freaked out by the transformation. The skeletal man, still bleeding slightly from the mouth, tried to explain, this is my true form. I am All Might, or at least what's left of him. He wiped his mouth, the blood smearing across his hand. Izuku could hardly process what he was seeing. All Might went on to explain that this form was similar to someone flexing to show off. But you always save people with a smile, Izuku said, his voice trembling, which caught the hero's attention. All Might mused on the line before sitting down heavily on the rooftop, his posture weary. This is what happens when you fight battles that are too big for you. 5 years ago, I took an injury that left me like this. I've lost parts of my organs, and after repeated surgeries, I can only maintain my hero form for a few hours a day. Izuku looked absolutely disturbed, unable to tear his eyes away from the injury. All Might continued, the battle that caused this, it was kept out of public knowledge. I requested it myself, to keep my image intact. That's what my smile is. It's a symbol, not just for hope, but for the burdens we carry as heroes. All Might then looked at the boy seriously. Kid, there's something I need you to understand. Heroes put their lives on the line every day. They face dangers you can't even begin to imagine. That's why, I can't tell you that you can be a hero without some kind of power. Izuku's heart sank as his eyes widened in despair. He saw where this was going and he couldn't believe it. He could feel the weight of All Might's words bearing down on him, crushing his hopes. All Might then looked at Izuku with a mix of pity and seriousness. I'm sorry, kid, but without a quirk, I don't think you can be a hero. You should look for a more realistic dream, he said as he finally exited the building with the bottled-up villain intact, leaving Izuku utterly alone. Izuku felt like the ground had been pulled out from under him. His vision blurred with tears as All Might's words echoed in his mind. The very dream he had clung to for so long now felt like it was slipping through his fingers. He was absolutely devastated. The voices and memories of all the bullying, the constant demeaning, and everyone putting him down for his desire to be a hero rushed back to him like a flood. Bakugo's cruel advice played on a loop in his head, mocking him. And now this. The #1 hero, his lifelong idol, the one who had always told people, you can be a hero, too, had just rejected him. Izuku clenched his fists, his nails digging into his palms as sadness and rage began to consume him. His body trembled with the overwhelming mix of emotions, the pain of a shattered dream twisting inside him. He truly was having a bad day. Izuku walked home in a daze, his feet moving on autopilot as his mind swirled in a void of emptiness. The usual hustle and bustle of the city around him seemed distant, muffled, like he was trapped behind a thick wall of glass. He felt nothing, no anger, no sadness, no frustration. Just a cold, hollow numbness that spread through his chest and made it hard to breathe. His phone dinged, and he saw Kevin's concerned message asking where he was and expressing worry. Izuku replied with a terse, "I'm fine," and instructed them to return to their building base. Despite his reassurance, he knew it did little to ease their concern. When he arrived at the front door of his apartment, he tensed up. The anticipation of facing his home, and by extension his mother, made his heart heavy. This was the part he dreaded the most. The anxiety he'd been trying to suppress bubbled up again, mingling with the numbness he felt. This was the place he had tried so hard to avoid after the painful encounter with All Might. The anticipation of seeing his mother, with their strained relationship, only made his heart heavy. Taking a deep breath, he unlocked the door with a shaking hand. The creak of the hinges as he pushed it open seemed unusually loud, echoing in the quiet hallway. His mother hadn't come to berate him. That was good. He was in no mood to be dealing with his mother's bullshit today. Izuku closed the door behind him, the silence of the apartment pressing in on him. His mother, Inko, was nowhere to be seen. He trudged to his room, hoping to escape into his thoughts and avoid any interaction. Unfortunately, he just couldn't look at his room the same way again. His room filled with All Might and hero merchandise now seemed like that even they are laughing at him. So he opted to just go outside. But as he passed the kitchen, he saw his mother standing there, back turned, clearly lost in her own world. Inko's voice broke the silence, sharp and unforgiving. "You're home late," she said, though her tone carried no real concern. She didn't turn around to look at him. Izuku, feeling the weight of the day crushing him, tried to ignore her. "Yeah," he mumbled, heading towards his room. He didn't have the energy to deal with her now. But Inko's voice followed him, rising in irritation. "You're always out, running around like a delinquent. Where the hell were you?" Izuku stopped, feeling a familiar sting. He turned back, his voice strained. "Nowhere. I just had a really bad day." Inko's shoulders tensed, her annoyance palpable. "A bad day? You always have excuses. You know, sometimes I wonder if you even care about how much you frustrate me." Izuku felt a familiar surge of anger and hurt. "Can't you just leave me alone? I don't need this right now." Inko turned to face him, her face twisted in frustration. "Oh, so now you're too good for me. You're always running off, always shirking your responsibilities. How do you think I feel, dealing with you? It was at this point where Izuku finally snapped. All the anger, all the frustration he had been bottling up the whole day had just come flooding out. Aarh. Why can't you just leave me alone for just one moment? Why can't you understand that I'm actually going through some shit? Why is it always about you? What do you know? Izuku's outburst hung in the air like a thick, suffocating cloud. His voice had erupted with a ferocity he hadn't even realized he possessed, years of pent-up frustration and anger finally exploding to the surface. The impact was visible. Inko had flinched, a rare show of vulnerability from the woman who seemed to wield her words like a weapon. But she quickly recovered, her face contorting in fury, unwilling to let her son get the last word. What do I know? I know that you could never understand what it's like to carry a burden. I know that you could never understand what it's like to be me. She spat back, her voice rising to match his, every word laced with venom. Izuku stared at her, incredulous, his chest heaving with the force of his emotions. Oh my God, you're still talking about yourself. Why? His voice cracked, raw with the intensity of his feelings. I'm standing here, trying to tell you how much I've been hurting for so many years, and all you can still think about is yourself. Inko's eyes narrowed, her anger reaching a boiling point. You think you're the only one who's hurting. You think you're the only one with problems. You're selfish, Izuku. You've always been selfish, thinking the world revolves around you and your stupid dream. Selfish. I'm selfish for wanting to be something more, for wanting to make a difference. All I ever wanted was for you to be proud of me. Is that too much to ask? To see me, to love me, to accept me, but no, it's never enough, is it? I'm never enough for you. Izuku's voice wavered, the pain of his words evident. Inko took a step closer, her expression hardening. Maybe it's because you've never been enough. Maybe it's because you've always been a disappointment. I've wasted so much of my life on you. Do you think that's fair to me? It's all because of you. Hasashi left. The words cut through Izuku like a knife. His vision blurred with unshed tears, his hands trembling at his sides. He could feel himself unraveling, the tenuous thread holding him together fraying with each passing second. And then, Inko said the words that shattered him completely. I wish you were never born. Silence fell, heavy and suffocating. The world seemed to stop spinning, the air edged out of the room. Izuku's heart plummeted, the final piece of his already fragile spirit crumbling to dust. For a moment, he just stood there, staring at her with wide, disbelieving eyes. The person who was supposed to love him unconditionally, who was supposed to be his refuge, had just destroyed whatever remnants of hope he had left. Without another word, Izuku turned on his heel and bolted out of the apartment, his vision swimming with unshed tears. The door slammed shut behind him with a deafening bang, but he didn't care. He just needed to get away from her, away from the pain, away from everything. His feet pounded against the pavement as he ran through the darkened streets, the world around him a blur. He didn't know where he was going, didn't care. He just needed to escape, to outrun the suffocating weight of his mother's words that now echoed in his mind like a cruel, endless mantra. The cold air slapped against his face, but he didn't stop. He kept running with heavy rain hitting his face as he fled from the apartment and the cruel words that echoed in his mind. Izuku sat in the dark, empty alleyway, his body curled up tightly against the cold, unforgiving wall. His breaths came in ragged, shuddering gasps as he fought to keep himself together, his chest rising and falling with the effort. His hands clutched desperately at his hair, pulling at the roots in a futile attempt to silence the voices and memories that crashed through his mind like a relentless storm. Each word, each cruel taunt, echoed in his head, growing louder and more overwhelming with every passing second. I wish you were never born. Why don't you take a swan dive off a roof and pray for a quirk in your next life? I'm sorry, kid, but without a quirk, I don't think you can be a hero. You're selfish. You'll never amount to anything. He's such a crybaby. Worthless Deku. It's all because of you. Izuku's body began to tremble uncontrollably, his muscles tensing as the weight of every insult, every rejection, pressed down on him like a crushing burden. He could feel himself breaking, the fragile walls he had built around his heart crumbling into nothingness. And then, there was silence. The world around him seemed to fade away, leaving only the deafening quiet of his own despair. The dam holding back his emotions, the one he had tried so hard to maintain, finally shattered under the pressure. A choked sob escaped his lips, followed by another, and then another, until the floodgates opened completely. Izuku buried his face in his hands, his body shaking violently as he cried, no longer able to hold back the tidal wave of grief, pain, and hopelessness that had been building inside him for so long. The tears came in an unstoppable torrent, soaking his hands and dripping onto the cold pavement below as the rain continued to pour. The water mixed with his tears, turning the ground beneath him into a small, swirling pool of despair. His sobs echoed through the empty alley, raw and agonized, the sound of a heart that had been broken too many times to mend. Why, he thought, the question reverberating in his mind like a haunting melody. Why had this world been so cruel to him? All he had ever wanted was to help, to be someone who could save others, who could bring a smile to their faces, just like his idol All Might. But every step of the way, life had thrown obstacle after obstacle in his path, tearing down his dreams, shattering his hopes, and leaving him alone in the darkness. Why is it always like this? His thoughts spiraled, each one sinking him deeper into the abyss of his despair. He had tried so hard, had given everything he had, only to be met with rejection, ridicule, and pain. All I wanted was to be a hero. The words echoed in his mind, a desperate plea to a world that seemed determined to crush him under its weight. But no one had listened, no one had cared. Not his classmates, not his teachers, not even his own mother. And now, even the one person he had always looked up to, the one who had inspired him to dream in the first place, had turned him away. Why am I not good enough? The question burned in his mind, searing his soul with its relentless agony. What did I do wrong? But there were no answers, only the unrelenting rain, the cold pavement beneath him, and the echo of his own broken heart. The world had been so cruel to him, and for what? What had he done to deserve this? He had only wanted to help. As Izuku cried, his sobs mingling with the patter of rain, a soft voice suddenly broke through the storm of his despair. Ya, Politu, Peipoi. Izuku sniffed, his tear-streaked face lifting just enough to see the small figure standing in front of him. He blinked through the blur of his tears, and his eyes widened in surprise as he recognized the familiar face. "Huh, Bob," he murmured, his voice hoarse from crying. There, standing right in front of him, was Bob, the small minion holding out his cherished toy teddy bear with a gentle smile. Behind Bob stood Kevin and Stuart, both of them looking at Izuku with genuine concern etched on their yellow faces. Bob took a step closer, his tiny hands extending the teddy bear towards Izuku. "Teddy oso Peipoi," he repeated, his voice soft and comforting. Izuku stared at the toy, a lump forming in his throat as the warmth of the gesture began to seep into his broken heart. He didn't bother to wipe away his tears as he reached out with trembling hands, accepting the teddy bear. The softness of the plush toy was a stark contrast to the cold, hard reality he had been drowning in. "Bob, Kevin, Stuart," Izuku whispered, his voice trembling. The concern in their eyes was so genuine, so pure, that it made the tears flow even harder. These small, strange creatures, the minions, were the only ones who had come to find him, who had cared enough to stay by his side in his darkest moment. He hugged the teddy bear close, his chest heaving with the weight of his emotions. "Thank you," he whispered, though the words felt inadequate. The minions had done more for him in this moment than anyone else had. They had found him when he felt lost, offered him comfort when he felt abandoned. Kevin and Stuart moved closer, placing their hands on his shoulders in a gesture of support. They didn't speak, but their presence was enough. They were there for him, and in that moment, it was all Izuku needed. As Izuku's tears dried and his spirits began to lift, he looked up at the bright moon hanging in the night sky. The soft, silvery light bathed him in a sense of calm as he contemplated his next move. His dream of becoming a hero was gone, shattered by the harsh realities of the world. But as he stood there with the minions by his side, a new determination began to flicker inside him. He realized that he didn't have to follow the path laid out by others. If being a hero wasn't in the cards for him, Then he would find another way to make his mark on the world. Izuku thought about All Might's suggestion of becoming a police officer, but dismissed it. He knew deep down that the same barriers that kept him from being a hero would likely keep him from being accepted as a police officer too. But then, his thoughts turned to the minions, these strange, loyal creatures who had shown him more support than anyone else. A new fire lit in his eyes as an idea began to take shape in his mind. If he couldn't be a hero, he would carve out his own path, one where he could still make a difference, even if it wasn't in the way he had originally dreamed. Standing tall with renewed purpose, Izuku turned to the minions, his voice steady and determined. "Kevin, Stuart, Bob. Where's my motorbike?" The trio looked at each other, confused by the sudden change in Izuku's demeanor. But Stuart pointed to the street outside the alleyway, where they had left the bike. "Fino Bada, ho ka?" he asked, curious about what Izuku was planning. For the first time in what felt like forever, a confident smile spread across Izuku's face. "Follow me," he said, the words carrying a sense of resolve. When they reached the motorbike, Izuku noticed that it was slightly damaged from the earlier crash with the slime villain. The front was a bit scuffed, and the handlebars were a little bent, but it was still usable. He grabbed his helmet and slid it on, feeling the cool weight of it settle over his head. Then, he swung his leg over the bike and sat down. "Come on, get on, guys," Izuku urged the minions, who were now buzzing with excitement and curiosity. They scrambled onto the bike, finding spots to hold on as Izuku revved the engine. The sound roared to life, echoing off the walls of the alleyway. With a determined glint in his eyes, Izuku revved the engine of his motorbike. Vroom, vroom. The sound roared through the quiet night as he clicked the button that activated the thruster. In an instant, they were off, speeding into the darkness like a blur of motion and light. Izuku made sure his helmet was securely in place, covering his face so no one could recognize him driving underage. But that was the least of his concerns. The thrill of the ride, the wind whipping past him, and the minions clinging on behind him made his heart race with exhilaration. He expertly maneuvered through the late-night traffic, weaving between cars and leaving them in the dust. The streets were mercifully clear at this hour, allowing Izuku to push the bike to its limits without much worry. The city lights blurred into streaks of color as they raced toward their destination. Izuku arrived at the once abandoned building where he had first encountered the minions, and his jaw nearly dropped in surprise. The place looked completely different from what he remembered. It was no longer the dilapidated structure he had expected to see. Instead, it now looked like a totally normal, unassuming building that blended in perfectly with its surroundings. "They've done this that fast. It's only been a week," Izuku thought, unable to hide his amazement. The minions had somehow managed to renovate the entire place in record time, disguising it so well that no one would ever suspect it housed anything unusual. As he stared at the building, a mix of pride and disbelief washed over him. The minions had not only built a base, they had created the perfect cover for whatever plans he might have in the future. "This is impressive," he muttered to himself, realizing just how resourceful and efficient his new companions were. Izuku entered the building with Bob, Kevin, and Stuart by his side. The interior was just as remarkable as the exterior, clean, organized, and humming with energy. He felt a sense of determination building inside him, something he hadn't felt in a long time. He was surprised to see them still working or chilling this late at night. He walked over to the speaker system near the entrance, his heart pounding with anticipation. Taking a deep breath, he pressed the button and spoke into the microphone. "All minions, please assemble in the assembly room. I have an important announcement to make." His voice echoed through the building, and within moments, the sound of hurried footsteps filled the halls as minions scurried to gather. Izuku turned to the trio beside him, giving them a nod of thanks for standing by him. Every minion inside the building began to go ecstatic as the day that they actually serve a new, evil boss might just come true. As he made his way to the assembly room, he could feel a new sense of purpose beginning to take root. This was at the start of something new. Something that would allow him to carve out his own path in a world that had tried to crush him. When he entered the assembly room, he was met with the sight of a sea of minions already cheering for him, their eyes full of anticipation and excitement. As Izuku stood before the sea of eager minion faces, his heart raced. The sheer number of them, all focused intently on him, was overwhelming. His palms were sweaty, his knees weak and arms are heavy. Public speaking had never been his strong suit, and the weight of this moment only made it more daunting. But as he looked into their wide, hopeful eyes, something inside him steadied. Taking a deep breath, he tried again, his voice a bit stronger this time. I'm not used to this, so bear with me. But I need to say this. Today is the beginning of something new. I know I haven't been the best leader, and I know I'm still figuring things out, but together, I think we can accomplish something amazing. The minions cheered, their excitement palpable, and it bolstered Izuku's confidence. He began to feel a spark, the fire of determination that had been ignited earlier now growing into a blaze. Izuku stood there, letting the minions' cheers wash over him. For the first time, he felt like he truly belonged somewhere. As he looked out at the sea of yellow faces, a deep realization settled in his heart. All his life, he had been rejected by his school, by the hero society, by his own mother, and by the world at large. No one had believed in him, no one had given him a chance, no one had accepted him for who he was. Except for them, the minions, strange and chaotic as they were, had accepted him without hesitation. They didn't care that he was quirkless, or that he was a failure in the eyes of the world. They didn't judge him or put him down. All they wanted was to serve an evil boss, and they had chosen him. Izuku's heart swelled with a mix of gratitude and resolve. If this was the role he was meant to play, then he would play it well. Who was he to let them down? The world might have turned its back on him, but he wouldn't turn his back on them. He would be the leader they deserved, and together, they would carve their own path, a path that would show the world that he was far from finished. Izuku's grip on the microphone tightened as his resolve solidified. "You all chose me," he said, his voice steady and filled with newfound conviction. "And I'm not going to let you down. I've heard your words. I know that you all want me to be evil. And, well, if it's an evil boss you want, then that's exactly what you'll get." "Yeah, woo-hoo." The minions erupted into a thunderous cheer, their loyalty and excitement evident. The day had come where they finally would serve an evil boss. Izuku smiled, a confident and almost wicked grin spreading across his face. This was it, his moment, his destiny. He wasn't just going to exist in this world, he was going to make his mark on it, and he was going to do it with them by his side. "Are you all ready to show this world what we're made of?" he declared, his voice filled with dramatic flair and conviction. The fire in his eyes was unmistakable, a burning determination that had been ignited by years of rejection and scorn. The minions responded with an explosive roar, their excitement and enthusiasm palpable. Their cheers reverberated off the walls, creating a powerful, electrifying atmosphere. Izuku felt a surge of adrenaline, his earlier pain and despair now transformed into a fierce resolve. Good, because from this point on, this world will know the might and power of the greatest villain of all time. Deku. Izuku's voice rang with defiant pride as he embraced the name that had once been used to belittle him. He would turn it into a symbol of his power, a name that would strike fear into the hearts of those who had doubted him. The minions erupted into a frenzied chant, their voices rising in a unified chorus of Deku. Deku, 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 Deku. The chant grew louder and more intense, their loyalty and excitement fueling the momentum. The room was filled with an almost tangible energy, the minions' fervor reflecting Izuku's newfound determination. As the chant continued, Izuku's smile grew wider, his confidence soaring. This was his moment, his chance to prove himself and make his mark on the world. With the minions by his side, he was ready to embrace his destiny and show everyone what the name, Deku, truly meant. Izuku Midoriya now has a new goal, a new dream. No longer will he strive to be a hero. No, he will strive to be the greatest supervillain this world has ever seen. He will be despicable. Sunlight streamed through the small gaps in the curtains, casting warm, golden hues across the room as Izuku slowly blinked awake. For a moment, he lay there, staring up at the unfamiliar ceiling, the events of the previous night flooding back into his mind. He wasn't in his small, cluttered bedroom filled with hero merch anymore. No, this was different. This was the beginning of his new life. He sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes and stretching his arms above his head. The bed he was in was surprisingly comfortable, far better than he expected from an abandoned building. But then again, with the minions around, nothing seemed impossible. He examined his body all over to notice that he was still wearing the same, drenched middle school uniform from yesterday. As he swung his legs over the side of the bed, the door to his room burst open, and a trio of familiar faces tumbled inside. "Big Boss," Bob exclaimed cheerfully, holding up a tray laden with a somewhat haphazardly prepared breakfast. Scrambled eggs, slightly burnt toast, and what looked like a banana smoothie occupied the tray, all wobbling precariously as Bob struggled to keep it balanced. "Good morning, guys," Izuku greeted with a soft smile, his heart warming at the sight. He hadn't expected this kind of treatment, but it was a welcome surprise nonetheless. It was a nice change of pace than when his mother would usually just burst into the room and dump hot water on him or just slap him hard until he was awake. Kevin stepped forward, adjusting his goggles proudly. "Banana smoothie. Pho too," he announced, pointing to the smoothie with enthusiasm. Stuart, ever the cool one, strummed a small ukulele, adding a musical touch to the morning greeting. The cheerful tune filled the room, instantly lifting Izuku's spirits. Izuku couldn't help but chuckle at their antics. "Thank you so much," he said, taking the tray from Bob before it could tip over. He took a sip of the smoothie, the sweet taste of bananas filling his mouth. "This is really good." The minions beamed at the praise, exchanging excited high fives before bustling around the room, tidying up and laying out a fresh set of clothes for him. Izuku watched them, feeling a sense of belonging that he hadn't felt in a long time. These little creatures had accepted him wholeheartedly, and their loyalty was unwavering. Izuku finished his breakfast and was getting dressed when he noticed Kevin standing nearby. "Hey, Kevin, what time is it?" Izuku asked, still half focused on getting ready. Kevin glanced at his watch and replied, "Picked his, 7:30. Izuku's eyes widened in panic. 7:30, I'm gonna be late." He immediately started rushing around the room, frantically grabbing his school supplies and muttering under his breath in a flurry of nervous energy. "Where's my bag? Did I finish that math assignment? Oh no, the uniform." But then, as he was about to bolt out the door, Izuku froze. A sudden realization hit him like a ton of bricks. "Wait a minute, I'm a villain now, I don't need to go to school anymore. Huh." But then, reality started to settle in. Sure, his mother hadn't reported his absence to the authorities or any pro-heroes, something he was oddly grateful for, even if it was a sign of her negligence, but it would definitely raise suspicion if he suddenly disappeared for more than a day or two. He groaned. As painful as it'll be, he supposes that he should attend school for now to lay suspicion off of him for the time being until he figures out his plan of action. Besides, there was something he needed to do there, and another pressing question gnawed at the back of his mind. How does one become a villain? He had spent his entire life idolizing heroes, so the thought of doing the opposite was completely foreign to him. Society completely villainizing and ostracizing them didn't help at all. What should I do now? How does a villain act? Should I start acting like Kachan? What should be my first act of villainy? Do I have to act evil? How should I debut as a villain? Dovelanes of Endotabuts. Izuku was so caught up in his spiraling thoughts that he didn't notice he had started muttering under his breath again, his words becoming a frantic blur. The trio of minions began to exchange nervous glances, clearly unsettled by their boss's sudden shift in demeanor. Big Boss. Deku? Bob asked nervously, his round eyes full of concern. Izuku snapped out of his thoughts and blinked at the worried expressions of his minions. He laughed in embarrassment. Sorry, guys, just a habit of mine. Sorry if I freaked you out." He apologized with a sheepish smile. As he stepped out of his bedroom and into the hallway, he was greeted by a flurry of activity. Minions were everywhere, scurrying about with tools, blueprints, and various gadgets that Izuku couldn't even begin to identify. The once abandoned building had been completely transformed. The walls were reinforced and painted, the floors polished to a shine. High-tech equipment lined the corridors, and several rooms had been repurposed into laboratories, workshops, and control centers. It was as if he had stepped into the headquarters of a top-tier organization. "Wow, you guys did all of this overnight?" Izuku asked in amazement as Kevin walked alongside him, nodding enthusiastically. See, Kevin replied, clearly proud of their work. Izuku couldn't help but smile, feeling a mix of pride and anticipation as he took in the results of their hard work. He was eager to dive into his new life as a villain, but unfortunately, he had one last obstacle to deal with: school. He let out a sigh. "I'd love to get started right away, but I've got to go to school for now," he said, grabbing his bag and slinging it over his shoulder. "Kevin, you're in charge while I'm gone, okay?" Kevin tilted his head in confusion, his large eyes blinking as he tried to understand. "Borko, ka mutafem otagi aka?" he asked, wondering why his boss was still going to school. Izuku, while not fully understanding their language, could sense Kevin's confusion. He paused, considering how to explain. "I know it seems strange," he began, "but right now, I need to keep up appearances. If I suddenly stop going to school, people will start asking questions. We don't need that kind of attention, at least not yet." Kevin nodded slowly, still a bit puzzled but trusting his boss's judgment. Izuku knelt down and gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "This is just for now. Once we're ready, school won't be an issue anymore. Until then, we need to stay under the radar. But I promise, you won't be disappointed." With that, Kevin smiled as he saluted, and the other minions around them followed suit, their tiny hands snapping to attention with enthusiastic determination. Izuku smiled at their loyalty and commitment. He stood up and turned to head for the door, the weight of his new double life starting to settle on his shoulders. As he stepped outside, he took a final look at the building, now a symbol of the new path he was carving out for himself. He felt a surge of excitement mixed with a sense of resolve. This was the beginning of something big, and he was determined to make sure the world remembered his name. With that thought in mind, Izuku set off for school, determined to balance his old life with his new one at least for now. Because for now, he needs to figure out who will he be tonight, that's the question. Izuku rode his motorbike through the quiet streets, the early morning air cool against his face. He made sure to stay out of sight, carefully avoiding any attention that might be drawn to the fact that he was an underage driver. As he neared the school, he found a secluded alleyway nearby and parked his motorbike, making sure it was well hidden before heading toward the school gates. As he approached the entrance of his middle school, Izuku paused, taking a deep breath. He had never dreaded going to school as much as he did today. The idea of sitting through classes, pretending to be the same quirkless, overlooked student, felt like a burden now. But he knew he had to grit his teeth and bear it for now, at least. Just keep a low profile and go unnoticed, he muttered to himself, steeling his resolve. His objective of the day: figure out what his first despicable deed will be. As the day progressed, the first and second periods were a monotonous blur. It was the same as always: students flaunting their quirks without consequence, teachers turning a blind eye, and Bakugo parading his explosive abilities and oversized ego while everyone around him cheered him on. It was all painfully familiar, including the occasional jabs and taunts thrown Izuku's way. Just another day in this quirk-obsessed school. But during lunch, Izuku had something more important to attend to. He made his way to the teacher's lounge, his heart pounding with a mix of anxiety and resolve. He needed to speak with his lousy homeroom teacher, an apathetic man who had never really cared about Izuku at all. But today, Izuku would be making a decision that would shock even this indifferent teacher. He knocked on the door and entered the lounge, finding his teacher lazily scrolling through his phone. Without preamble, Izuku spoke up, his voice steady and determined. "Sensei, I've come to withdraw my application for the UA Hero course," he said, getting straight to the point. His teacher barely glanced up from his phone, already prepared to deliver another condescending remark about how pointless it was for a quirkless student to aspire to be a hero. But as the words sank in, the teacher froze, his mind processing what Izuku had just said. "Midoriya, how many times do I have to wait? What? The surprise in his teacher's voice was almost satisfying, but Izuku didn't let it show. He simply stood there, waiting for the teacher's reaction. "I've come to withdraw my application for the—" "Why yes, I heard you." The teacher interrupted, still processing the shock. "It's just, why? What caused this change?" His voice wavered with genuine curiosity, a hint of alarm creeping in as he tried to make sense of the situation. The usually disinterested and lackluster teacher, who often seemed to loathe both his job and life itself, was absolutely flabbergasted. For once, the man who rarely showed any emotion beyond boredom was fully engaged, trying to comprehend whether this was truly the Izuku Midoriya he knew. Izuku sighed, keeping his expression neutral. "Well, it's just that I've finally realized it's impossible for someone like me to be a pro-hero, so I believe my purpose in life truly lies elsewhere." His words were carefully chosen. While not entirely untrue, he couldn't be too honest and reveal the full extent of his new determination to pursue villainy. The teacher looked taken aback, almost shocked. The curt and formal attitude was completely unlike the timid, nervous boy he knew from class. He didn't even stutter. "Well, Midoriya, I'm proud that you've finally taken my and others' words to heart." Izuku's brow twitched as he resisted the urge to sneer at the audacity of the man. "You don't get to be proud," he thought bitterly. The teacher sighed, putting on a facade of concern. "As your teacher, I only care deeply about your well-being and future. So it's good that you've finally dropped your unrealistic dream and are thinking more realistically and reasonably." He had the gall to act all professional now. Izuku resisted the urge to roll his eyes. "Yeah, right, like you cared about my well-being and future, in the first place," he thought, feeling a swell of irritation. The hypocrisy of it all was almost too much to bear, but he kept his composure, knowing he had bigger plans ahead. "Well, it looks like lunch is almost over. We can talk more about this tomorrow. Until then, I expect you to have picked a reasonable career choice. See you, Midoriya," the teacher explained, dismissing the conversation with an air of finality. "Yes, goodbye indeed, sensei," Izuku casually replied back with a cheery smile as he began to leave. A cheery smile that completely contradicted the disdainful, almost hateful look in his eyes. After Izuku exited the teacher's lounge, he quickly took a deep breath and calmed himself down. "Keep control of your emotions, Izuku. Only half a day left." He reminded himself to keep a low profile. As the day went on, word quickly spread around the school that Deku had finally given up on his stupid hero dream. Izuku's brow twitched in annoyance. Of course, this school couldn't keep anything classified, and nosy people simply couldn't mind their own damn business. Either that, or some lousy teacher that overheard his conversation with his homeroom teacher earlier had recklessly leaked that sensitive info which led to a chain event leading to this. Izuku was sitting alone during the second lunch, as usual, but for once, he felt a sense of peace. With everyone now convinced he had given up, they were less likely to bother him, leaving him free to plot his first move without interruption. "Oi, Deku, we need to talk." Until now, as Bakugo had decided to approach him, his voice dripping with the usual arrogance, but this time he sounded a lot more serious. Izuku's eyes casted a shadow for a moment, until he decided to put on his usual, timid and nervous Deku act to play along. What is it, Kei-chan?" he asked with faux nervousness. "I heard that you've finally given up on your stupid hero dream." He started. "Why yeah, why?" Izuku replied stuttering, playing the part. Bakugo actually scoffed. "Yeah, right, you expect me to believe that? To believe that you, of all people, have just suddenly given up on being a hero? What's next? Pigs start flying." Bakugo sneered and Izuku tried not to give him the stink eye. "You scorn me for wanting to be a hero and you still scorn me for not wanting to be a hero. Honestly, Bakugo, what do you want from me?" Izuku thought, both perplexed and frustrated. At this point, he just wanted to be left alone. The arrogant blonde continued to eye him suspiciously, his gaze narrowing as if he was trying to see through Izuku's act. "What's your game, nerd? What are you planning?" he demanded, his tone laced with both irritation and mistrust. "Nothing," Izuku stammered, keeping up his timid facade. I just realized that I'll never be a hero, so there's no point in trying anymore. Bakugo's eyes narrowed further, clearly not buying it. TCH, you're up to something, Deku. Don't think I won't figure it out. He growled, before finally turning away, leaving Izuku to his thoughts. As Bakugo walked off, Izuku couldn't help but smirk inwardly. You're right, Kachan. I am up to something. Something that you have no idea about at all. And with that, Izuku finally made a confirmation. Thanks to the delightful behavior of the people in his school, he now knows exactly what his first act of villainy will be: burning down this damn place. The thought alone sent a shiver of excitement down his spine. The very place that had been a constant source of pain and humiliation would soon be nothing more than a pile of ashes. The satisfaction of erasing it from existence was too tempting to resist. It's time to make them all pay, Izuku thought, a dangerous glint in his eyes as he began to plot his first despicable deed. As the school day came to an end, students and teachers filed out of the building, eager to head home. But Izuku lingered behind, waiting patiently until the halls were empty, leaving only a few security guards and janitors. This was his moment. His first step before he turned Aldera Jr. high into ashes was to disable the security systems. Even though the school's security was notoriously poor, Izuku couldn't afford to take any chances. He had to be thorough. All right, here we go, Izuku thought, steeling himself for his first true act of villainy. He crept through the empty hallways, the sound of his footsteps barely audible on the polished floors. His heart raced with both nerves and excitement as he headed towards the janitor's closet, knowing he needed a disguise to move about more unnoticed. He slipped into the janitor's room, closing the door behind him with a soft click. The room was small, cluttered with cleaning supplies, mops, and various uniforms hanging on a rack. Izuku quickly grabbed one of the uniforms, only to realize that it was several sizes too big for him. Oh, you've got to be kidding me, he thought, eyeing the oversized uniform. But there was no time to waste. He quickly pulled the janitor's outfit over his own clothes, struggling to keep the massive pants from slipping off his hips and the sleeves from hanging over his hands. Izuku silently cursed and decided to change again to another uniform that'll fit, only to realize that it was the same size as before. So, he throws another uniform away and tries another one again, and again, and again, and again. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Izuku found a uniform that was just barely manageable. It still hung awkwardly on his frame, but he could make it work with some quick sleeve rolls and a frayed piece of string he found on the floor to cinch the waistband. As he fumbled with the uniform, trying to make it look halfway decent, he suddenly heard footsteps approaching the door. Izuku's eyes widened in panic. Oh no! He frantically glanced around the cluttered closet, his heart racing. There was nowhere to hide. In a split-second decision, Izuku dove to hide behind a stack of mop buckets, of all things, crouching low and hoping he wouldn't be seen. The door creaked open, and Izuku held his breath, praying that he wouldn't be noticed. A janitor walked in, humming a tune as he grabbed a mop from the rack. Izuku squeezed his eyes shut, willing himself to disappear. The janitor paused, his gaze sweeping the room. For a moment, Izuku thought he was caught. But instead, the janitor's attention was drawn to the pile of discarded uniforms. Who the hell keeps messin' with my closet? The janitor grumbled, shaking his head. With an exasperated sigh, the janitor picked up the discarded uniforms and left, still muttering to himself. Izuku waited a few more seconds before letting out a sigh of relief. That was too close, he thought, cautiously emerging from his hiding spot. With the janitor gone, Izuku adjusted the uniform one last time, pulling the cap low over his eyes and rolling up the sleeves as best as he could. He couldn't help but sigh at how ridiculous this all was. I really need to plan better next time, he thought with a mix of embarrassment and determination. Now, with his disguise in place, Izuku slipped out of the closet, taking a mop and mop bucket with him to truly make disguise more believable. He tried to walk with confidence despite the oversized pants that still threatened to trip him up even if he still had his school uniform inside. Every few steps, he had to tug the waistband back up, but at least he was moving forward. Izuku shuffled down the hallway, his heart pounding as he spotted two janitors heading straight toward him. He took a deep breath, tugging his cap lower over his face to obscure his features, and tried to appear as casual as possible. Just act natural, he thought, forcing himself to maintain a steady pace. The janitors, fortunately, were too absorbed in their conversation to pay attention to the odd sight of a too small boy in a too big uniform walking by. Anyone who cared to notice would have seen that Izuku stood out far more than he blended in, but the two janitors didn't so much as glance in his direction. As Izuku passed them, one of the janitor's footsteps paused, causing Izuku to hold his breath in fear of being caught. But the man only sneezed, muttering something about allergies before continuing on. Izuku exhaled a long sigh of relief as he finally reached the security office. His heart was still racing, but a small, triumphant grin tugged at the corners of his lips. When he arrived at the door, he carefully peeked through the small open crack to see the security guard, who was supposed to be watching over the cameras, lazily scrolling through his phone while munching on a donut. The guard was clearly more interested in his snack and whatever was on his screen than in the security feeds. Izuku's breath hitched, his palms trembling as sweat began to bead on his forehead. He had never done anything like this before. Doubts started creeping in, whispering that maybe he should back out, that this was too risky, too extreme. But then, the memories of all the people who had put him down, the ones who had crushed his dreams and made his life a living hell, flooded his mind. His fist clenched tightly, and with it, his resolve hardened. This wasn't just about the here and now, it was about his future, his new purpose. If he was going to be a villain, he needed to start acting like one. No turning back, Izuku thought, steeling himself as he prepared to make his move. He reached into his pocket and pulled out an invention his minions gave him. It was a carefully crafted makeshift dart gun, in the form of a banana. And the bullet was also in the shape of, get this, a banana. Izuku couldn't help but shake his head, a small smirk tugging at his lips. I might be off the mark here, but I'm starting to think my minions have a thing for bananas, he mused. With one last deep breath, Izuku pushed the door open just enough to get a clear shot. The guard didn't even look up. Izuku aimed carefully, the banana gun feeling awkward and unsteady in his hands. He fired. The banana-shaped dart shot out with surprising speed, hitting the guard squarely on the neck. The guard's eyes widened in surprise, his hand instinctively reaching for the dart before he slumped forward, unconscious, his donut falling from his hand. Izuku stood frozen for a moment, hardly believing that it had actually worked. But there was no time to celebrate. He quickly slipped into the security office and locked the door behind him and carefully moving aside the unconscious guard. He had work to do. Izuku quickly reached into his pocket, retrieving a small USB device that he had crafted himself. With the unconscious guard slumped over the desk, Izuku plugged the USB into the main monitor. As soon as the device connected, the screen flickered, and a series of codes began scrolling rapidly. The security system's defenses crumbled almost instantly, bypassed by the hacking program embedded in the USB. Within moments, Izuku had full control over the school's security cameras and alarms. A triumphant grin spread across his face as he navigated the system with ease. This is it, he thought, the thrill of his first true act of villainy fueling his resolve. With a few keystrokes, Izuku deactivated all the security cameras and alarms, ensuring that no one would interrupt his plan. After he was done with the security system, he now needs to know where to hide this unconscious body of the guard beside him. Izuku glanced down at the unconscious security guard slumped over the desk. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple as he realized he needed to hide the body before anyone noticed something was amiss. The guard was large and heavy, much bigger than Izuku, and the challenge of moving him seemed daunting. Okay, just need to get him out of sight, Izuku thought, eyeing the weapon storage closet on the other side of the room. Taking a deep breath, he grabbed the guard under the arms and began to pull, but the man's weight was more than he anticipated. HNGGH. Come on, you big guy. Izuku groaned as he struggled to drag the guard across the floor, his feet slipping as he tried to gain traction. He nearly tripped over his own oversized janitor pants, and the guard's shoes squeaked loudly against the floor, making Izuku wince. Come on, just a little more. Izuku mentally urged himself, but the guard was like dead weight. He tried lifting the guard's legs, hoping it would make it easier, but quickly realized that wasn't going to work either. Whoa, he stumbled backward, almost landing flat on his back, before regaining his balance. After a few more failed attempts, Izuku opted for a different approach. He positioned himself behind the guard and started pushing with all his might. The guard's body slid inch by inch toward the closet, with Izuku grunting and panting from the effort. By the time he finally got the guard to the closet door, he was practically gasping for air. Almost there, Izuku thought, determination flaring as he shoved the door open and began the final push. With one last burst of strength, he managed to roll the guard into the closet, where the man's body slumped at the bottom of the storage. Woo, Izuku exhaled as he wiped the sweat from his brow. The tranquilizer was enough to knock out an elephant for 24 hours, so Izuku was sure that the guard wouldn't wake up for another 48 hours. He glanced at the insides of the weapons of the closet and his eyes widened. The sight of the weaponry inside had been a surprise. He hadn't expected a middle school to have such an arsenal. Rifles, batons, even what looked like riot gear. This was way beyond what any school should have, especially a mundane one like Aldera Junior High. Huh. So this is where all the school budget went, Izuku muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. He couldn't help but chuckle at the absurdity of it all. For a moment, the idea of a school being more prepared for a war than for actual education seemed almost too ridiculous to be real. But then again, this was his school, so maybe it wasn't so surprising after all. He closed the closet, making sure the door was firmly shut and that the guard's unconscious form was completely hidden from view. Izuku made a mental note of stealing all those weapons later tonight. With the guard safely out of the way and the security system under his control, Izuku's job here was done as he took back the hacking USB from the monitor. Izuku made sure that it was untraceable. Now, he just needs to get the hell out of here and move on to his next step, make a shit ton of explosive material. He smirked as he felt that his minions would very much like a mission like this. He quickly removed the oversized janitor uniform, feeling an immense sense of relief as he was free from its constricting and ill-fitting fabric. Stuffing the uniform behind some cleaning supplies, Izuku double-checked his surroundings before heading towards the exit. With the security system down, sneaking out of the school would be a breeze. But Izuku still made sure to move swiftly and silently through the dimly lit hallways as to avoid any lingering staff or more security. Every step brought him closer to the school's exit and further along the path to complete his first evil deed. The exhilaration of it all made his heart pound in his chest. Finally, he reached the exit, pushing open the door and stepping out into the cool evening air. He took a moment to breathe it in, relishing the freedom and the thrill of what was to come. As Izuku stepped out of the gates, pausing to look back at the building that had been the source of so much misery in his life. The sight of it, once looming and oppressive, now filled him with a sense of power and anticipation. A dark, mischievous grin spread across his face as his eyes gleamed with malice. "Enjoy your last miserable day, you pathetic excuse of a school," he thought, silently bidding farewell to the school that would soon face his wrath. The countdown had begun, and soon, this place would be nothing more than a memory reduced to ashes. Izuku fast-walked to his motorbike he parked in the nearby secluded alleyway earlier today. Sliding onto the bike, he took a moment to adjust his gloves and rev the engine. The powerful hum of the machine beneath him was a comforting reminder of the control he now held. A large, confident smile formed upon his lips. This school, and everyone in it, had underestimated him for far too long. Now, he was the one pulling the strings. With one last glance back at Aldera Junior High, a place that had once towered over him as a symbol of his suffering, Izuku felt an exhilarating rush. He revved the engine louder, the sound echoing off the walls of the narrow alley. He was done with this place and from now on, there was no turning back. He kicked the bike into gear and sped off into the night, leaving the school and his old life far behind. Because tonight, Aldera will burn. As Izuku arrived back at his current base, a surge of adrenaline still coursing through his veins, he wasted no time. This was it tonight, everything would change. He entered the hideout building sort of where his minions were already bustling about, engaged in their usual antics. Without hesitation, he stepped into the center of the room and whistled sharply, instantly grabbing the attention of every yellow-skinned minion in sight. They quickly dropped whatever they were doing, their wide eyes turning to him with eager anticipation. "Listen up, everyone, I have an announcement to make," Izuku announced, his voice echoing through the chamber. The room fell silent, every minion focused intently on their leader. Within the silence, Izuku smirked. "Now, who's ready to blow some shit up?" He roared into the crowd with almost wicked smile on his face. The room erupted into a frenzy of cheers and excited chatter, the minions' enthusiasm filling the underground hideout. They bounced up and down, some waving their tiny arms in the air, while others let out high-pitched squeals of delight. Izuku couldn't help but feel a rush of satisfaction as he watched them, his own excitement mirrored in their reactions. "That's what I like to hear," Izuku shouted over the din, his smirk widening. "Now, in order for us to do this, we need lots of things that'll blow up. So, your very first mission from me is simple. Get some explosives." Izuku paused mid-sentence, his eyes widening in disbelief as he took in the sight before him. Each and every one of his minions was already armed to the teeth with an assortment of explosives, bombs, grenades, TNT, C4, and even a rocket launcher that one of the minions was struggling to hold upright. Where did they get them? Izuku has no idea, but he's glad they're prepared. "Huh, seems like you guys are more ready for this than I thought," Izuku muttered, feeling both baffled and impressed by their preparedness. He quickly shook his head, regaining his focus. Anyways, yes. Who wants to come with me?" As soon as the words left his mouth, the room erupted into chaos. Me, Paka me, no, Paka me, no, me, Ka bodzig. Me. Izuku's eyes widened at the overwhelming response, the minions practically vibrating with excitement as they shouted over one another. He raised his hands, trying to calm them down. Okay, alright, enough, quiet down, simmer down. But the minions were too caught up in their eagerness to hear him. Their voices grew louder, the room buzzing with anticipation. Finally, Izuku had enough. Taking a deep breath, he shouted at the top of his lungs, "Silence!" The effect was immediate. Every minion froze, their mouths snapping shut as they stared at him with wide eyes. The room fell into an eerie silence, and Izuku exhaled in relief, feeling a bit more in control again. Izuku surprised even himself with that yell. He didn't think he had it in him. He faced the crowd once again and cleared his throat. "Alright," he began, his voice calm but commanding. "I obviously can't take all of you with me, so I'm just going to pick a squadron of you," he emphasized, holding up his hand to prevent another surge of eager shouts. "The rest of you will stay here and watch over this place for tonight." "Understood." The minions nodded in unison, their excitement barely contained as they waited for him to choose. Izuku sighed, scanning the crowd before starting to call out names. Yes, he was actually learning the names of his minions. Kevin, Stuart, Jerry, Larry, Tim, Mark, and Phil. "You're all with me." He then turned to another minion. "Mel, you're in charge of the place." Mel, the minion with a single eye and a different hairstyle from the rest of his mates, puffed out his chest with pride, giving a sharp salute. "See, big boss," he said as the other chosen minions immediately perked up, their faces lighting up with excitement as they gathered around Izuku. "Alright, team," Izuku said, feeling a surge of confidence. "Let's do this." Play song Ost. Double Life by Pharrell Williams. Before heading out to complete his mission, Izuku decided it was time for a change. He'd been wearing his middle school uniform for the past 2 days, and it was starting to feel more like a relic of his old life. He rummaged through his base and discovered a suitable outfit that, surprisingly, was still rather clean despite being tucked away for who knows how long. It consisted of a gray turtleneck, a gray scarf with black stripes, black pants, and polished black shoes. Over it all, he slipped on a black trench coat with a distinctive zipper. Must have belonged to someone before. Don't mind if I do, he mused as he examined the kodan, now claiming it as his. To complete his ensemble, Izuku donned his custom-made mechanical goggles, which had a futuristic design and were perfect for multiple uses during this mission. The new look made him feel more like the villain he was determined to become. It was a perfect blend of sophistication and menace, a far cry from his old-school uniform. With a satisfied nod, Izuku completed his transformation and prepared to lead his minions on their mission. Outside, in the dimly lit alleyway, the roar of engines filled the air as well as headlights lit up in the darkness. Izuku's sleek motorbike stood at the ready, and beside him were 3 mini versions of his own motorbike, each being ridden by a pair of his minions as Kevin sat with Izuku. The trio of small bikes looked almost comically oversized in contrast to their riders, but they were functional and fit the minions perfectly. His minions revved their engines in unison with Izuku, with their excitement palpable. The night was young, and with a final glance back at his base, Izuku led the charge. The plan was in motion, and the darkness of the night seemed to whisper of the chaos to come. "All right, minions," Izuku called over the roar of the engines, his voice sharp and authoritative. "Let's get this done." His minions responded with a raucous cheer. "Yeah, woo-woo, Koopy go." With a final rev of their engines, Izuku and his squad raced into the night. The dark alleyway quickly disappearing behind them. Their mission was set, and the thrill of impending chaos filled the air as they sped toward Aldera Junior High, ready to set their plan into motion. But Izuku and his minions didn't speed through the streets recklessly. They maneuvered their way through quiet backstreets and narrow alleyways, carefully avoiding the gaze of any passers-by or potential pro-heroes. Each turn and route was calculated to keep them out of sight, ensuring that their approach would be as discreet as possible. Eventually, Izuku and his squad arrived to the school and parked in the same alleyway Izuku parked in earlier today. Izuku and his minions dismounted and approached the entrance of the empty school, the building looming ominously in the moonlight. He turned to his squad, a dangerous glint in his eyes, and announced, "Here we are, boys." He took a moment to gaze at the school with a mix of disdain and satisfaction. "Look at this piece of shit," Izuku sneered. Just because he used to never swears, doesn't mean that he doesn't know about these words. His most obsessed bully is Bakugo, for Christ's sake. And now that he's a villain, he might as well let loose. "We're gonna blow this hellhole sky high." The minions quietly cheered in response, their excitement matching Izuku's own. Their eager voices and small bursts of energy contrasted sharply with the quiet seriousness of their task. Izuku's eyes gleamed with satisfaction as he surveyed his squad's impressive arsenal. He looked down at his minions, a smirk tugging at his lips. "You all got the stuff we need." The minions nodded enthusiastically, eager to show off their impressive collection. Larry and Jerry, the more fatter minions, hefted bags brimming with C4, bombs, and TNT. Mark, the average-sized minion with 2 eyes, carried a flamethrower with a sense of pride, while Phil was expertly juggling a bundle of grenades. Kevin, with his usual air of efficiency, held a gallon of gasoline, and Stuart brandished dual-silenced pistols with an almost comical flourish. And Tim had a damn bazooka. It was clear that everyone was loaded. Izuku nodded approvingly. "Looks like we're ready for the big show. Remember, the goal is to make sure this place goes up in flames and doesn't leave a single piece standing." The minions' eyes sparkled with excitement and mischief as they approached the building, their gear ready for action. Meanwhile, Izuku took a moment to set the scene. He pulled out his phone and slipped on his earphones, a mischievous grin spreading across his face. He was gonna destroy this school, but he wanted to have fun while doing it, so he put some style to it. In his earphones, he played the song, "Bad," by Michael Jackson. There was one time when he watched an animated movie from the pre-Quirk era that he learned something about villainy. Something that separates a villain from supervillain was presentation. With the song pumping through his earphones, Izuku followed his minions as they diligently set up explosives around the school. He bobbed his head to the beat and dance-walked towards his school, savoring every moment of his grand spectacle. With the security down, he was free to do whatever he wanted. Izuku snapped his fingers to the beat, his eyes gleaming with a mix of excitement and malice. He watched with satisfaction as his minions worked diligently, their movements punctuated by the occasional clatter of explosives being set in place. Ah, your butt is mine, gone, tell you right, ah. Just show your face in broad daylight, ah. Izuku made his way through the entrance, his steps syncing with the infectious groove of the song. He threw a few of his own bombs and grenades into classrooms with a flourish, his movements as flamboyant as they were calculated. Inside, his minions were already busy planting explosives. I'm tellin' you on who I feel, ah. Gonna hurt your mind, don't shoot to kill. Boom. Asterisk. As he turned a corner, a sudden explosion echoed through the building. Phil had accidentally pulled the pin from a grenade while juggling them, causing a shoe locker to erupt in a shower of metal and debris. The unexpected blast made Izuku burst into laughter. Shimon. Ah, Shimon. Lay it on me, ah, alright. Izuku continued his flamboyant dance down the hallway, tossing bombs and grenades into each classroom with dramatic flair. His movements were exaggerated, every throw accompanied by a flourish, making the whole scene feel like a twisted, high-energy performance. The school was now a stage for his grand performance, and Izuku was determined to leave it in ruins, all while grooving to his favorite song. The minions, equally caught up in the excitement, continued their work, the night's events unfolding with explosive flair. He was destroying his school, while dancing. And Izuku reveled in the chaos, his movements synchronized with the beat. As he tossed another bomb into a classroom, he couldn't help but smile at the irony. He was destroying the institution that had once tormented him, all while dancing to a song that embodied his newfound sense of freedom and rebellion. The night was his, and he intended to make it unforgettable. As he continued to dance, Kevin followed behind him, throwing his own grenades inside the classrooms with a manic grin and wild laughter as well as trying to mimic his leader's dancing moves. The minions worked in sync, setting up more charges and adding to the spectacle of destruction. When the chorus of the song hit its peak, Izuku struck a pose just as the grenades exploded in unison, the blasts lighting up the darkened school in a synchronized show of chaos. With the second verse reaching his ears, Izuku made his way to the security room. He kicked the door open with a flourish, the forceful entrance befitting the villain he had become. Inside, the room was dimly lit, the control panels casting an eerie glow on the walls. Kevin, Stuart, Izuku called, his voice commanding. Get all the weapons from the storage room. I want everything useful out of it. Kevin and Stuart didn't hesitate. With a quick nod, they dashed off to the storage room, eager to retrieve the stash of weapons. The two minions returned moments later, dragging out an assortment of weapons in their backpacks, from batons to tasers, with mischievous grins plastered on their faces. As the two minions exited the room, their backpacks laden with the confiscated weapons, Izuku extended his hand toward Larry, who promptly handed him a grenade. Izuku's lips curled into a wicked smirk as he pulled the pin without hesitation. With a casual toss, he hurled the grenade into the security room, indifferent to the fate of the guard inside. The door clicked shut just as the explosion erupted behind him, the blast sending shockwaves through the hallway. But Izuku didn't flinch. Instead, he resumed his dance walking, the rhythm of the song still pulsing in his ears as he made his way toward the principal's office. Once arriving, he reached the door of the office and gave it a forceful kick open. The door flew open with a loud crash, slamming against the wall. Izuku stood in the doorway, silhouetted by the flickering lights and the distant glow of the fires now consuming parts of the school. The principal's office, a place that had once held authority and intimidation over him, now felt small and insignificant under his gaze. Stepping inside, Izuku scanned the room, taking in the desk cluttered with papers, the shelves lined with books and awards, and the principal's chair empty and devoid of the power it once represented. The irony wasn't lost on him. This was the same office where he had been reprimanded, belittled, and made to feel worthless. But not tonight. Tonight, he was in control. Izuku pressed a button on his goggles, activating the X-ray vision. As he scanned the room, his eyes narrowed with interest when he spotted a hidden safe tucked behind the principal's desk. Interesting, he thought, already calculating the amount of money it might hold. Without hesitation, he barked out orders, his voice sharp and authoritative. Larry, Tim, haul that safe out of here, he commanded, pointing to the concealed treasure. The two minions sprang into action, scrambling over to the desk to begin the heavy lifting. Jerry, plant more bombs around the room. I want this place in ruins. Jerry nodded eagerly, setting to work with a gleeful grin, carefully positioning the explosives for maximum damage. And Kevin, Izuku added, turning to the minion with the gasoline, lay down a trail from this office to the school entrance. We're gonna make sure this place lights up like a fireworks show. Kevin gave a mischievous salute, already unscrewing the cap of the gasoline container and beginning to pour a steady line across the floor. Izuku watched his minions work, satisfied with their efficiency. The safe would be a nice bonus to this operation, a small reward for the chaos he was about to unleash. With everything in motion, the final phase of his plan was falling perfectly into place. As Izuku glanced down at the papers scattered across the principal's desk, his curiosity got the better of him. What could the principal possibly have to say about him and Bakugo, the school's so-called star student? With a smirk, he shuffled through the documents, quickly skimming the contents. There were reports, evaluations, and notes from teachers. Most of them were predictable praise for Bakugo's raw potential, powerful quirk, and natural leadership, accompanied by little comments about his explosive temper. The green-haired boy had to roll his eyes and scoff. But when he found a file with his own name on it, Izuku's smirk faded into a cold, hard expression. The words were harsh, dismissive, quirkless, unremarkable, no future prospects. It was clear the school had written him off as a failure, a nobody destined to amount to nothing. A bitter laugh escaped Izuku's lips. Of course, he muttered. All that praise for someone like him, and nothing but disdain for me. He crumpled the papers in his hand, feeling a mix of anger and satisfaction. Well, let's see how they feel about their star student when this place is reduced to ashes. With that, he tossed the papers aside and continued overseeing the preparations for the destruction of the school. After his minions were out of the room, Izuku followed suit, but not before he took one last look around. The principal's office, once a symbol of authority, was now a ticking time bomb. After everything was set, the group rendezvoused back at the entrance, just as Kevin finished spilling the last of the gasoline. Izuku smirked, the thrill of impending chaos coursing through him. "Steward, light it up," he commanded. The one-eyed minion grinned, flourishing his suppressed gun before firing at the gasoline trail, igniting a fierce blaze. He also ordered for those who had the stolen weapons and the safe to store it in the motorbikes. As the flames began to spread, Izuku's eyes fell on the school's board near the entrance. A risky idea popped into his head, and he found himself debating whether or not to leave a mark of his villainous debut, even after all the work he did covering his tracks. After a considerable amount of time internally arguing, he caved in. They do say that you should present your first act of villainy loud and proud. Izuku thought, who said that? He had no idea, he might have just made it up, but it sounded right. Grabbing a can of spray paint, Izuku approached the board. With a flourish, he scrawled across it in bold, jagged letters, "The rise of Deku is here." Stepping back, he admired his handiwork. The flames reflected in his eyes as he turned to his minions. "Let's get out of here," he ordered, the adrenaline pumping as they raced away from the school and hiding behind the corner of the alleyway that they parked their motorbikes in. Izuku looked down and nodded to Larry to press the detonator on his hand. Everyone covered their ears, preparing themselves for the barrage of explosions after Larry pressed the button. They waited until nothing happened. K Piccolo. Ho ka hm marid pik go doc. Jerry muttered, confused as to why the explosions didn't go off. Larry, to yak pick, Tim accused, pointing at Larry, thinking he had messed up or broken the detonator. Ka deep non ik pick. Larry shot back, defending himself and insisting he hadn't broken anything. The two of them began to argue, slapping each other with their tiny hands in a comical fashion. Their bickering grew louder as Izuku tried to intervene and calm them down, his patience wearing thin. Boom, asterisk, kaboom, asterisk. The delayed explosions suddenly roared to life, shaking the ground beneath them. The school erupted in a series of massive blasts, debris flying through the air as fire consumed the building. The force of the explosions was so intense that even from their safe distance, they could feel the heat and the rumble of the ground. Izuku couldn't help but laugh, the tension evaporating as he watched the school collapse in a blazing inferno. "Hey, looks like it just needed a little more time," he said with a smirk and a nervous laugh, taking in the fiery spectacle. "All right, time to go, guys," he called out, and with that, the entire crew hurried to their motorbikes. As they sped away from the scene, the roar of their engines echoing through the night, Izuku caught the faint sound of sirens in the distance. The corners of his mouth curled into a smug, confident smirk. He had done it, he'd made his mark, and now more people would know the name Deku. With the flames of his former school fading into the distance, Izuku felt a rush of exhilaration. He wasn't just running from the scene, he was racing toward a future he'd shaped with his own hands. As Izuku drove through the night, the full moon illuminated the road ahead. He took a brief moment to glance up at it, a satisfied smile playing on his lips. So this is what it's like to be a villain, huh? It's not too bad, he thought. His first despicable deed had been a resounding success, and the moon seemed to shine in approval of his audacious act. Izuku felt an exhilarating sense of accomplishment. This was only the beginning of his reign, and the night sky was the perfect backdrop for his newfound villainous journey. Soon enough, he will make sure that the world will know his name and he will be the greatest, most ultimate supervillain. He swears it. The next morning, Katsuki Bakugo awoke from his slumber, grumpy as usual. His eyes snapped open, his usual scowl already forming as the morning light filtered through the curtains. As he sat at the edge of his bed, he hears his damn old hag call out to him. "Oi, brat, wake up," his mother yelled at him from the kitchen at the bottom floor. "I'm already awake, you old hag," the arrogant blonde snapped back. "Get down here right now. There's something you have to see," his mother yelled. Katsuki raised a brow, both confused and annoyed. He groaned and rubbed his eyes, already dreading whatever his mother had to say. "I swear, if this is about my ing grades again," he thought in irritation. Katsuki dragged himself out of bed, his frustration mounting with each step. The morning was turning out to be just as annoying as he'd feared. He stomped down the stairs, grumbling under his breath. "What the hell is it this time?" he snapped as he entered the kitchen, where his parents stood in front of the television watching the news, their faces a mix of worry and disbelief. Katsuki took a bottle of water from the kitchen counter as he approached his parents to find out what all this damn fuss about so early in the morning. "Look at this," his mother exclaimed, pointing at the news. "There was a huge explosion at your school last night. They're saying it's some kind of attack." On the television, the headlines read, "Aldera Junior High School in Musudafu burned down and destroyed. Culprit on the search." Katsuki's eyes widened. He had never been more hooked onto the news in his life until now. Out of everything, this was not what he expected to witness when he woke up. For possibly the first time in his life, he was in absolute disbelief as he in stunned silence. He even blinked multiple times as to make sure he wasn't still dreaming. What the hell? In an absolute rarity, Katsuki actually stuttered as his mind raced, trying to figure out who the hell did this. As he watched the news report, he noticed the anchor revealing that the only casualty was a security guard, which brought a look of sadness and dismay to his parents' faces. However, Katsuki paid no mind to that and demanded to know who was the goddamn villain who did this, since they also revealed that this was a villain's debut. The villain who did this calls himself as Deku. Pro-heroes and law enforcement are currently finding any sort of information on the culprit and who might be familiar with this name. The news reporter on the television revealed. Katsuki choked on his drink. Izuku spent the night in his temporary base once again. Yes, temporary. After his explosive act of villainy last night, he knew his time here was limited. The pro-heroes would soon zero in on him, and it wouldn't be long before this place was raided. Izuku sat on a worn-out couch, surrounded by the faint glow of computer screens and gadgets as well as empty bottles and cans of soft drinks and leftovers of food. He had celebrated hard with his minions last night. His mind began racing with thoughts of what to do next. He had to be smart. He had to stay one step ahead. That was his next plan of action for today. Find or create a large, secret base for himself and his minions. Somewhere they could operate without the fear of being discovered so easily. The problem now was a matter of transportation. After the destruction of the school, Izuku knew he couldn't use his motorbike and speed through secluded areas and alleyways anymore. The pro heroes would be on high alert, their eyes sharp and their patrols more frequent. Izuku couldn't risk coming across an underground hero or, worse, getting trapped by one. What a pain, he thought, frowning at the challenge. If only he could fly. The thought lingered, and a small smile crept onto his face. Maybe that should be his next invention, a jetpack or some form of transportation that allowed him to take to the skies. With that, he could evade ground-based detection entirely, adding another layer of unpredictability and variety to his movements. Yeah, he mused aloud, already envisioning the designs in his mind. That could work. But before he could get started on that, he needed to secure a new base of operations. The abandoned factory he had in mind wasn't too far, but getting there unnoticed would be tricky. He needed to move fast and smart. Deku suddenly sighed, hanging his head low in dejection as he remembered one last thing he needed to do. As much as he hated the thought of seeing his mother again, especially after the huge argument they had the other night and the heart-shattering words she'd thrown at him, he had to go home one last time. There were still a few of his inventions lurking in his room, items he couldn't afford to leave behind. And there were a few things he needed to say to her. Words that had been stuck in his throat ever since their fight. Words that he had been wanting to say to her after almost a decade of pent-up emotions because of her emotional abuse and neglect. He clenched his fists, steeling himself for what he knew would be a difficult and emotional encounter. But it was necessary. This was part of the final break from his old life, from everything that had held him back and hurt him. If he was going to fully embrace his new identity as a villain, he needed to sever all ties, including the ones that still tugged at his heart to finally be free of his past. Deku eventually exited the room to see his minions already buzzing with activity, both productive and non-productive. Minions, listen up, I have an important announcement to make. Izuku called out, his voice echoing through the room. He was still new to this crowd speaking and barking out orders, but he was starting to get used to it. We are going to be moving out, he declared, his voice growing more confident with each word. Pack everything up. We need to be out of here as soon as possible. I've been scouting out potential new bases, but until I've secured it, we'll be on the move. And until then, I need all of you to lay low. No unnecessary noise, no drawing attention. Understand? The minions nodded enthusiastically, their chatter quickly turning to focused activity as they began packing up the various gadgets, weapons, and supplies scattered around the base. Izuku watched them work, his mind already racing ahead to the next steps. He couldn't afford to make any mistakes. The heroes would be on high alert after the school incident, and he knew it was only a matter of time before they started closing in. Now, it is the matter of transportation that would be suitable and inconspicuous. Izuku decided to use a company van that belonged to this building he saw before the minions came and redecorated it. It would be perfect. Once he reached the van, he noticed a couple of minions making some final touches to it. They worked diligently, polishing the exterior, checking the engine, and ensuring the van looked as ordinary as possible. When they were done, Izuku took a step back to admire their handiwork. The company van looked clean, unremarkable, and in perfect working condition, a stark contrast to the dilapidated state it was in before. His lips curled into an impressed smirk. Man, you guys work quick, he commented, genuinely pleased by his minions' efficiency. Their ability to get things done, especially under pressure, was becoming one of their greatest assets. The minions beamed with pride at the praise, some even giving little salutes or bowing theatrically. It was clear they were eager to impress their leader, and Izuku couldn't help but feel a swell of pride in his odd but loyal team. While the rest of the minions were busy preparing and packing up the base, Izuku decided to take a pair of the minions, the ones who had cleaned the van, with him to begin the drive. Time was limited, and he knew they needed to move quickly. As they settled into the van, Izuku's mind drifted to the inevitable confrontation with his mother. The thought of going back home, even for a brief moment, brought a bitter taste to his mouth. But he pushed those feelings aside. There was no room for hesitation or second-guessing now. Next stop, Izuku muttered to himself, gripping the steering wheel a little tighter, home. He said, trying to hide the bitterness inside as he began to drive. The minions in the back remained cheerful and oblivious to the storm of emotions swirling within him. Their excitement was almost contagious, but Izuku kept his focus on the road ahead. The bitterness lingered, but he buried it deep, knowing that this was something he had to do. There were still things he needed from home: tools, inventions, and most importantly, closure. As they drove through the busy streets at the day and remaining inconspicuous, Izuku couldn't help but think about the last conversation he had with his mother, the harsh words exchanged, and the hurt that still lingered. But this time, he wasn't going back as the same Izuku Midoriya. He was going back as Deku, the villain who would soon make the world remember his name. Inko Midoriya knew that she was not a good person. Ever since her husband left and the day that Izuku was diagnosed as quirkless, life had taken a sharp downward turn. The once bright and hopeful future she had envisioned for her family had crumbled, leaving her feeling trapped and overwhelmed. The stress of her job had become unbearable, and she found herself taking refuge in increasingly frequent conversations with her old friend Mitsuki. But even those conversations offered little solace, especially when her son's hopeless obsession with becoming a hero, a dream that seemed impossible without a quirk, was thrown into the mix. The school reports only added to her despair. They painted a picture of a boy who was not just quirkless but also a troublemaker, constantly causing problems and drawing negative attention. Inko couldn't reconcile this image with the son she had once adored. It was as if the world was mocking her, giving her a child who, in her eyes, could never amount to anything. She couldn't believe that she had given birth to someone so worthless. And so, Inko began to withdraw. The weight of her disappointments and regrets grew too heavy to bear, and she found herself turning to alcohol to numb the pain. It became a crutch, something to help her escape the reality she didn't want to face. The more she drank, the more she distanced herself from Izuku. She couldn't bear to look at him, couldn't stand the reminder of all the things she had lost. Ignoring him became easier and easier. She told herself that it was better this way, that if she didn't acknowledge him, maybe the pain would lessen. Maybe she could forget the life that could have been. But deep down, she knew the truth. She knew she was failing him, failing herself. However, on this particular day, she actually felt concerned about her son for the first time. The news had spread quickly. His school had been reduced to rubble, engulfed in flames and destruction. As much as she resented him, the thought of losing him completely sent a chill down her spine. Sure, she hated him, but she didn't want him dead. Those awful words echoed in her mind: "I wish you were never born." Inko froze, her heart sinking as the memory of that night resurfaced. The look on his face, the shock, the hurt, it all came rushing back, and she felt a pang of guilt that nearly brought her to her knees. She growled as she recomposed herself. Was this the universe telling her a sign or something? The throbbing in Inko's head intensified, a painful reminder of her recent indulgences. She sighed, pushing the half-empty bottle of sake away. Maybe it was time to lay off the alcohol and face the reality she'd been avoiding for so long: her son. She was startled to realize that she hadn't seen Izuku since their explosive argument. An entire day had passed, and she had simply assumed he was off doing whatever it was he did to escape reality. Inko realized that she had never bothered to truly understand what her son did in his free time, beyond his relentless pursuit of a hero dream that seemed more like a delusion to her. But now, with the news of the school's destruction flashing across the television screen, a deep worry began to creep into her heart. What if something had happened to him? What if he had been at the school during the attack? Because of this, she knew that her son would be living at home for a while until they've rebuilt it or found a school to switch to. She sighed. Maybe this was indeed the universe's sign of telling her to regain some sort of semblance of their relationship, or at least, try. Suddenly, the door of her apartment swung open, making Inko think that she must have forgotten to lock it, and the familiar face of her son entered the room. Speak of the devil, she mused. However, when she went and finally met him face to face, her eyes widened at how different he looked. Gone was the boy she remembered in his school uniform. Standing before her was someone entirely different, draped in black from head to toe. His polished shoes, zipped-up black trench coat, striped scarf, and support goggles all contributed to a menacing aura that filled the room. But it wasn't just his clothes that had changed. It was his eyes, dark, filled with such an unbearable amount of hatred and disdain, and all of it was directed at her. Inko had never seen her son look at her in such a way. Her breath caught in her throat as she met his gaze, the bitterness between them now palpable. Inko gulped as she finally regained her voice. Izuku, she whispered, her voice almost trembling. What happened to you? She asked, desperately trying to strike up a conversation, to bridge the chasm that had grown between them. But her son didn't even acknowledge her. Without so much as a glance in her direction, he walked right past her, his steps purposeful and cold. She turned, watching him as he moved through the apartment and toward his room, searching for something. The realization that he wasn't here to talk, or even to see her, struck her with a painful clarity. However, she paid closer attention to what he was carrying and wearing. Inko's heart pounded in her chest as she watched her son move with a cold determination she had never seen before. The large duffel bag slung over his shoulder, the gloves on his hands, and the dark, ominous outfit, it all screamed danger. Her thoughts raced, the news of the school's destruction replaying in her mind like a nightmare. No, it couldn't be, she thought, panic rising in her throat. The pieces of the puzzle began to fit together in a way that terrified her. Izuku, her son, had something to do with the school attack. The realization was like a slap to the face, leaving her stunned and breathless. Izuku, she called out, her voice trembling with fear and desperation, what are you doing? But he didn't stop, didn't even hesitate as he continued toward his room, as if her words were nothing more than background noise, and entered his room. Inko, still paralyzed by shock, struggled with whether she should follow him or not. Her heart pounded in her chest, the reality of the situation sinking in. Inside his room, Izuku moved swiftly and methodically. He rifled through his closet, dug under his bed, and searched every secret spot he had used to hide his inventions. He glanced around at the room that had been his home his whole life for one final time. He especially made a glare at all the All Might figurines. His room was now a stark reminder of a life he was leaving behind. The mementos of his past seemed almost alien to him now. After what felt like an eternity, Izuku emerged from his room with a duffel bag visibly stuffed with his belongings. His expression was resolute and unfeeling as he made his way to the front door. Inko, overwhelmed by a mix of fear and regret, reached out and grabbed his sleeve, her voice trembling as she struggled to speak out her words. Izuku, please, talk to me. What's happening? I want to help you. She was harshly cut off, however, as Izuku's response was swift and harsh. Without a second glance, he turned and slapped her hand away with a force that left her reeling. The look in his eyes was cold and unyielding, as if she were nothing more than a bug to him. Izuku's disdainful glare deepened and darkened, his rage boiling over. Help. Now she wants to help me. Now she cares. He seethed internally, his thoughts fueled by outrage and betrayal. After everything she's said and done, she thinks she can just waltz in and fix this. Izuku's fists clenched and his teeth gritted as he finally decided to let loose the pent-up emotions he had been harboring for almost a decade. His voice was low but seething with venom as he spoke the words he had long kept buried. Mom, I hate you. I hate you. Izuku's voice trembled with the intensity of his emotions, each word laced with the pain and resentment he had been forced to bury for years. His eyes, filled with tears he refused to let fall, bore into his mother's as he unleashed the torrent of feelings he had long kept hidden. No, you don't get to care about me now, he shouted, his voice cracking under the weight of his hurt. Not after what you told me the other night. Not after years of you pretending that I didn't exist. He took a step closer, his anger burning hotter with each passing second. Where were you when I was getting jumped by Bakugo and his friends every day, huh? Where were you when they made my life a living hell, day after day? You didn't even notice the bruises, the cuts, the burns, nothing. Izuku's hands trembled as he continued, his voice rising. Where were you when school was taking a toll on me, when I was drowning in despair because I didn't have a quirk? You were too busy feeling sorry for yourself to see how much your son was hurting. You're pathetic. His voice broke, the anger and pain melding together in a raw, emotional outburst. Where were you when I needed your help, Mom? When I needed someone to tell me that I was worth something, that I could be more than just quirkless trash that everyone in this world has deemed me. You were supposed to be there for me, but you weren't. You never were. As Izuku's words rang out, the weight of his pain hung in the air like a storm cloud. His tears, a mixture of anger and sorrow, streamed down his face, each drop a testament to the years of neglect and hurt he had endured. His chest heaved with heavy breaths, the intensity of his emotions almost too much to bear. Inko, paralyzed by the raw fury in her son's voice, could only watch in stunned silence. Every word he spoke cut through her, the reality of her failures as a mother hitting her like a ton of bricks. She had never seen him like this, had never realized just how deeply she had wounded him until now. Izuku's breathing was ragged as he glared at her one last time, his eyes burning with a mixture of hatred, rage, sadness and despair. All I ever wanted was for you to care, to at least pretend that you gave a damn about me. But no, you were too busy drowning in your own misery to even see me. The room was silent except for the sound of Izuku's heavy breathing. He took a moment, his chest rising and falling rapidly as he tried to regain some semblance of control over his emotions. When he spoke again, his voice was filled with finality, a devastating blend of fury and despair that left no room for reconciliation. I'm done with you, he declared, his voice breaking slightly but carrying an unshakable resolve. I'm done with this place. I'm going to make a name for myself, and I don't need you or your approval. I absolutely despise you with every fiber of my being, and I'm leaving. Goodbye. Without waiting for a response, Izuku turned on his heel and stormed out of the apartment, the sound of the door slamming shut behind him echoing through the silent space. Inko was left standing there, the emptiness of the apartment mirroring the emptiness in her heart, as the reality of what she had lost finally set in. Inko Midoriya collapsed to the floor, her knees giving out beneath her as the weight of her son's words bore down on her. The tears she had held back for so long finally broke free, streaming down her face in a torrent of anguish. Her body trembled with sobs as the reality of what had just happened hit her like a tidal wave. She concluded that this was her consequence. Her karma for taking her son's life for granted and neglecting him ever since that day he was diagnosed quirkless. She might have not faced any sort of legal or physical repercussions, but this tsunami of pain, sorrow and guilt felt more than excruciating. And she knew that she deserved every bit of it. Izuku walked away from the apartment, his heart lighter than it had been in years. The burden of unspoken words, of pent-up rage and sorrow, had finally been lifted. He had said what he needed to say, severed the last tie that held him back. There was no going back now, and he didn't want to. As he stepped out into the cool morning air, he took a deep breath, letting the sensation of freedom wash over him. It was almost surreal, the idea that he had finally cut himself loose from the pain and neglect that had defined his life for so long. The world ahead was vast and uncertain, but for the first time, he felt ready to face it on his own terms. His thoughts raced as he considered the possibilities before him. What would his next move be? How would he build his reputation as a supervillain? The path ahead was uncertain, but that didn't deter him. If anything, it fueled his determination. Izuku had always been driven, always pushing himself to go beyond his limits, and now that drive was focused on his new life goal of being the world's best and most ultimate supervillain. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Unlike the side of heroes, the world of villains was cutthroat, filled with dangers he had only begun to understand. But just like with his inventions, Izuku was ready to put in the work, to go beyond plus ultra to succeed. He would take on whatever challenges came his way, learning and adapting as he went. Izuku's steps quickened as he approached the van where his pair of minions were waiting. He felt a surge of energy, a fire burning inside him that hadn't been there before. There was no turning back now, and that was just how he wanted it. As he climbed into the van, the sound of the door closing felt like the final seal on his old life. The engine roared to life, and as they drove away from the apartment complex, Izuku didn't look back. There was no need to. Everything he needed was ahead of him, and he was ready to claim it. With each passing moment, Izuku grew more certain of one thing. He felt ready to conquer whatever came his way, and nothing would stand in his path. The morning after the explosion at Aldera Junior High, the once bustling school was nothing more than a smoldering ruin. The site was cordoned off, police tape fluttering in the breeze as investigators and pro-heroes arrived at the scene. The air was thick with the acrid smell of burnt debris, and the sight of the collapsed building was sobering. Underground pro-hero Eraserhead stood at the forefront of the investigation team, his eyes narrowed as he surveyed the destruction. His usually calm demeanor showed hints of concern. This wasn't just any incident, but a deliberate attack that had targeted a school full of innocent students. Whoever did this had crossed a line that no one should ever cross. Beside him, Detective Naomasa Tsukauchi was already busy coordinating with the police force. He was a seasoned detective, known for his ability to extract the truth from even the most complicated situations. His quirk, lie detector, allowed him to sense when someone was being dishonest, making him a valuable asset in this investigation. The initial reports suggest that this was a deliberate act, Tsukauchi said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. The explosion wasn't caused by a malfunction or accident. This was planned. Eraserhead nodded grimly, his dark eyes scanning the wreckage. Any leads on who this Deku might be? He asked, recalling the menacing message left on the school board. Tsukauchi nodded, his expression serious. According to the students, Deku is a nickname for a student at the school, Izuku Midoriya. They say he's been bullied for years, primarily by another student named Katsuki Bakugo. Eraserhead nodded his head, a bit satisfied that they already have zeroed in on the identity of the culprit. His eyes narrowed. Are we looking at a case of revenge then? A student pushed too far. Since there are no other factors yet discovered, yes, Tsukauchi replied, his voice tinged with caution. If this was an act of retaliation, it could mean Midoriya has crossed a line. We need to find and apprehend this Izuku Midoriya and talk to him before he commits more and more acts like this. The detective explained. Eraserhead's expression remained stoic, but there was an underlying urgency in his voice as he asked, "Do you know why he was bullied?" They said that he was bullied because he was quirkless, Tsukauchi answered. Eraserhead's eyes widened in rare surprise. Quirkless, he repeated, the weight of that word settling heavily in the air. A quirkless teenager, someone who, by societal standards, was considered powerless, had caused this level of destruction. It was almost unimaginable. And he was capable of this type of destruction. Eraserhead added, his mind racing to process the implications. If a quirkless person could do this, it meant Midoriya had found a way to level the playing field, or worse, to tip it entirely in his favor. Then, we can't underestimate him, Eraserhead concluded, his tone now more resolute. This isn't just a case of revenge, this is a declaration. We need to stop him before he goes any further. Indeed, Tsukauchi nodded seriously, pulling up a file on his tablet that displayed a profile of Inko Midoriya, Izuku's mother. Our first step should be to question the person closest to him. If anyone knows where he might be or what he's planning next, it's her. Deku sighed, feeling the weight of the day's failures pressing down on him. The shady underworld he'd tried to infiltrate was proving more resistant than he'd anticipated. No one took him seriously, and every lead seemed to end in mockery and laughter. However, there was one person who seemed to take an interest in him, Jiren, Deku believed his name was. He recalled the conversation he had with the man, who had offered to lend him some help in exchange for a few favors. He even lent Deku his business card, the one he's currently holding in his hand before putting it back in his pocket. Izuku felt all sorts of bad and suspicious energy from the guy, which is what he had expected since he went all around going into shady place and meeting shady people, but he was different. And Deku had a feeling that Jiren was bad company and he definitely shouldn't get too much into contact with him. But he kept the card just in case things get desperate. Parking his van in an alleyway, he leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes in frustration. Things just weren't going as smoothly as he hoped. After a moment, he opened his eyes and glanced into the rearview mirror. The two minions he had brought along, oblivious to the tension, were engrossed in a card game, their casual demeanor a stark contrast to the stress Deku was feeling. He sighed before speaking up. You two. What are your names? The minions looked up from their game, surprised by the sudden question. Am I Namba tis Joey? One answered. K'm Tony, said the other one. Got any ideas? He asked. After a long, exaggerated and comical gestures of contemplating, they both couldn't come up with anything and shrugged while blowing a raspberry. Deku let out a dry chuckle. I should have known, he thought. After knowing his minions for quite a while, he should have known that these little guys would not be the most sharpest tools in the shed. Needing to clear his mind and curious about the aftermath of his actions, Deku reached over and turned on the van's radio. Static filled the air for a moment before it settled on a news station, the announcer's voice cutting through the noise. And in breaking news, authorities are still investigating the devastating explosion at Aldera Junior High School. Early reports suggest that the incident was no accident, but a calculated act of destruction. Several eyewitnesses claim to have seen a figure in black fleeing the scene shortly before the blast occurred. The figure left behind a chilling message: the rise of Deku is here. Deku's grip tightened on the steering wheel as he listened, a mix of satisfaction and anxiety brewing inside him as his message had been received and told. Now people will now be familiar with the name Deku. Deku, whom authorities have found out to be a young man named Izuku Midoriya, is on the run and is responsible for this heinous crime. However, one can't help but question why he did such a thing, especially for someone so young. After further investigating, the authorities had concluded that this was a case of bullying gone too far. Let us cut to the people of Aldera to see what they have to say. The reporter said. Deku felt a mixture of intrigue and cautious as the news then cut off to audio of the people of Aldera being interviewed and interrogated. Deku couldn't help but grit his teeth as he listened to what they were saying. I don't know why he did it. He's always been such a nice person, said one student. I've always thought that he wanted to be a hero more than anything, so I don't know why he would do something like this, said another. I have no idea what his reasoning for this. He had always wanted to be a hero, said his goddamn homeroom teacher. Izuku knew because he recognized his patronizing voice. He continued to seethe as more and more similar comments were said. Deku's hands trembled with rage as he listened to the comments pouring in from his former schoolmates and teachers. Each word felt like a slap in the face, a twisted reminder of the falsehoods and hypocrisy that had surrounded him his entire life. He was such a good person. He wanted to be a hero. The words echoed in his mind, their patronizing tone gnawing at him. How dare they pretend to care now? Where was this so-called concern when he was suffering, when he was being tormented and ridiculed every single day? Or when they themselves had used him as some sort of quirk ragdoll? They had turned a blind eye to his pain, dismissed him as nothing more than a quirkless nobody. And now they acted surprised, shocked that he had finally snapped. Eventually, Izuku had enough and shut the radio off. The audacity of these people. Deku exasperated once again. Great. Now, his mood was worse than before. Slumping back in his seat, he blew a raspberry, trying to shake off the negative emotions swirling inside him. He desperately needed a break, something to take his mind off the mess he was in. As he glanced down at the door pocket, an old magazine caught his eye. Curious and needing a distraction, he picked it up and began flipping through the pages. After skimming past a few ads and articles, a picture of a beach caught his attention. It was Takoba Beach, described in the magazine as a serene paradise, a place where people could escape the stress of daily life and find peace. The vibrant image of the sandy shores and gentle waves seemed to promise a respite from everything that was weighing him down. Deku's eyes sparkled with a hint of intrigue. A peaceful walk on the beach sounded like exactly what he needed to clear his mind and sort out his thoughts. Maybe, just maybe, it would help him come up with a good plan, a way to move forward and achieve his goals. All right, he muttered to himself, feeling a small sense of resolve building within him. Let's take a break. Maybe this beach will help me think clearly. He started the van and directed himself and his minions to Takoba Beach. As they drove, Deku felt a sliver of hope that this brief escape would give him the clarity he needed. Perhaps a peaceful moment by the ocean would be just the thing to calm his turbulent mind and inspire his next move. Sure, This may have been a more than reckless move now that authorities are keeping their eyes peeled for him and that the public has been informed of what he looks like, but it was just for a short while. He needs this. It couldn't have been a bad idea. Well, this is a bad idea. Deku's brow twitched as he saw the pitiful sight of the beach, or rather, what's left of it. His eyes scanned all over the beach to see it all filled with all kind of dump and trash. It may as well be a junkyard rather than a beach. So much for a peaceful escape, huh? Deku muttered to himself, his disappointment palpable. He had hoped this trip would give him a moment of clarity, a brief reprieve from the chaos of his life. But instead, he was met with yet another obstacle, a literal garbage dump standing between him and any sense of peace. His minions, Joey and Tony, peeked out from the van, looking equally dismayed at the sight of the trashed beach. Blech, Joey commented, sticking out his tongue in disgust. No via nama pem pata da relax aka, Deku. He said. Yeah, ba lugo stinks. Tony added on, covering his mouth. Izuku still may have not understood what they were saying, but he could definitely tell that they were feeling what he was feeling. Deku couldn't help but agree. This was a far cry from the idyllic spot he had imagined. But then, as he stood there, staring at the heaps of garbage, a thought crossed his mind. Maybe this beach, in its current state, wasn't entirely useless. Maybe, just maybe, there was something he could do here that would help him in the long run. All right, Deku said, his mind starting to shift gears. So it's a dump, but that doesn't mean we can't make something out of it. Joey and Tony looked at him with curious expressions, clearly not following. What if? Deku began, his voice trailing off as he started to piece together an idea. What if we clean it up, and use all of this material to make our own base and perhaps many more? He suggested as ideas of designs of base, inventions, and even vehicles were already cooking up in his genius mind. However, just as he was getting pumped up about finally having a plan of what to do, the reality sank in. Building an entire secret base, even with his army of minions, is going to take a long time, and with the pro-heroes being on his tail, time was not something Izuku had lots of. He would need another temporary base big enough to haul him and all of his minions to stay in for the time being while also laying low until his base was built. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the business card that Jiren gave him. He knew that dealing with someone like Jiren was a risky move. The man had a shady aura that made Izuku's instincts scream at him to stay away. But with the heroes closing in and his options running out, he felt like he had no choice. With a deep sigh, Izuku slipped the card back into his pocket, feeling the weight of the decision settle in his gut. I better not regret this, he muttered to himself, his voice laced with uncertainty. He pulled out his phone and dialed the number on the card. The phone rang twice before a familiar, smooth voice answered on the other end. Well, if it isn't the young mastermind, Jiren greeted, his tone dripping with amusement. To what do I owe the pleasure? Izuku took a deep breath, pushing aside the unease gnawing at him. I need a place, he said, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Something big enough for me and my associates. It needs to be secure, off the radar, and available immediately. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before Jiren chuckled. I figured you'd come around, kid. I've got just the place in mind. But remember, favors like this don't come cheap. I know, Izuku replied, his grip tightening on the phone. We'll work out the details later. Just tell me where to go. Jiren gave him an address, a location on the outskirts of the city though an anonymous email. You'll find what you need there. But be careful, Midoriya. The heroes are getting smarter, and they're watching. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be. There was a pause on Izuku's end before he finally spoke up, trying to keep his voice steady. Quote. Why are you willing to work with me? His suspicion was barely concealed, but he couldn't afford to be too direct. Jiren was silent for a moment, then let out a low, amused laugh. Listen, kid, I know you're the one who blew up that middle school. Izuku narrowed his eyes. Yes. The news had just given out what I. The man on the other end of the line cut Izuku off with a chuckle, the sound unsettling. Not from the news. I've got a mole in the police. Information travels fast in the right circles. I knew it was you and your little minions before your profile got out to the public. Izuku's mind raced. The news had not disclosed information about his minions, and the fact that Jiren knows about them means that he wasn't lying. This man was far more connected than he had anticipated. The fact that Jiren knew about the explosion, and so quickly, only deepened Izuku's mistrust. But it also meant that Jiren was someone who could be a valuable associate, at least for now. You still haven't answered my question, Izuku pressed, his tone more serious. Why are you helping me? Jiren's tone shifted, becoming slightly more serious, but still laced with amusement. Let's just say I've got a knack for spotting talent. You've got potential, kid, ambition, brains, and the guts to pull off something like that explosion. I respect that, but more importantly, I see an opportunity here. You get what you need, and in return, I get a front row seat to see how far you can go. Of course, this isn't charity. You owe me, and I always collect. Izuku frowned, the weight of the deal sinking in. He didn't like the idea of being in debt to someone like Jiren, but he knew he didn't have much choice. His options were limited, and if he wanted to continue his plans, he needed the resources Jiren could provide. Fine, Izuku said after a long pause, his voice firm. But let's get one thing straight. I don't trust you. Jiren laughed again, clearly unfazed. Smart kid. Trust is a rare commodity in our world. Just focus on your goals, and leave the rest to me. You've got the address. Get there, settle in, and lay low. Now, here comes the price. Izuku's grip on the phone tightened as he braced himself for whatever Jiren was about to ask. Listen up, kid. There's a place that's going to serve two purposes for you. It's where you'll start repaying my favor, and it's somewhere that might pique your interest. It's called the Bank of Evil. Bank of Evil, Izuku repeated, his voice a mix of curiosity and caution. The name itself was almost too on the nose, like something out of a comic book, but the weight in Jiren's tone made it clear this was no joke. Yeah, kid, you heard me right, Jiren replied, his tone almost amused by Izuku's reaction. It's not just a catchy name. This place is where the worst of the worst keep their treasures, their secrets, and their dirty laundry. It's also where you'll be able to negotiate for illegal weapons and material, as well as the place where you're going to make your first real mark in this world. Izuku's mind raced, trying to piece together what this meant. And what exactly am I supposed to do there? Wherever that is. You're going to make a delivery, Jiren explained, his voice taking on a more serious edge. It's a package. Nothing too big, but important. You're to take it to the Bank of Evil and hand it off to one of the insiders. The details of location and the instructions of how to get inside will be in your email, including who you're supposed to meet. But to make a mental note as your reminder later, I'll tell you now that you'll have to go to the receptionist and ask to have a meeting with a man named Mr. Perkins. Jiren explained. Izuku listened closely, trying to absorb every detail Jiren was giving him. A delivery. To a place called the Bank of Evil, and I have to meet a guy named Mr. Perkins. Got it, he mentally noted, but there was also one more thing he had to make sure. What's the catch? Izuku asked, his voice steady. The catch is simple, Jiren replied. Don't open the package, don't ask questions, and make sure it gets to the right hands. Do this, and our little partnership stays friendly. Mess it up, and, well, let's just say I have ways of making people regret their mistakes. Izuku nodded, feeling both anxious and determined. Understood. I'll make sure it goes smoothly. He answered, a bit unnerved by Jiren's threat. And remember, Jiren added, his voice dropping lower, this isn't a game. You mess this up, and there will be consequences. But if you pull it off, you'll have taken your first step into a much bigger world. I know. I'll get it done. Good to hear, Jiren replied, his tone lightening up again. Keep your head on straight, and we might just make a decent team. Get this favor done, and the keys to the place is yours. Now get going, kid. Time's ticking. As the call ended, Izuku pocketed his phone and started the van, the gravity of his new mission settling in. The Bank of Evil, his first real test in the world of villains. It was risky, but if he wanted to be taken seriously, he had to start somewhere. He started the van, setting his course for the location of the package to deliver for this bank of evil. Whatever awaited him there, he was ready to face it. He took a deep breath. He was gonna make sure that his eventual life as a villain was gonna be a good time. Katsuki Bakugo was not having a good time. It's only been the first day of being homeschooled and he already felt like he wanted to blow some shit up. Which may not be a good idea considering that his school had just been blown up to bits. But he needed something to do to let off some steam. But he couldn't, not with every adult's treating him like he might explode at any moment. He could see it in their damn eyes, the suspicion, the unspoken questions. It made his blood boil. As he paced around his room, his mind kept going back to that morning, the morning he found out that Aldera Junior High became a crater in the ground. And more specifically, it kept going back to Izuku Midoriya. Deku. Goddamn Deku. The kid he'd bullied for years. He knew something was off about him the other day. The quirkless loser who suddenly had the guts, and apparently the power, to blow up an entire school. And now he was completely off the radar, disappearing into who the hell knows where. Katsuki clenched his fists, sparks crackling at his fingertips. That damn Deku, who the hell does he think he is? He muttered to himself, the anger in his voice barely contained. However, just as much as he is angry, he was also feeling guilty. Katsuki shook his head and tried to shake off the terrible, spreading feeling in his heart. It made his skin crawl, the idea that somehow, maybe, he was partially responsible for all of this. But how could that be? He was Katsuki Bakugo. The one who was going to be the greatest hero. One that would surpass even All Might himself. He wasn't supposed to feel guilty, especially not over someone like Deku. That quirkless loser who never knew when to give up. But the memory of that morning, when he'd seen the smoldering remains of Aldera on the news, wouldn't leave him. And neither would the memory of how Deku looked the last time they'd spoken. There had been something different in his eyes, something dark and determined. Katsuki had brushed it off at the time, but now he couldn't shake the feeling that he should have seen it coming. Why am I feeling like this? Why the hell should I feel bad? He's the one who went crazy. Katsuki snarled, trying to convince himself as much as anything. But the words felt hollow, and the gnawing feeling in himself only growing heavier. That damn Deku, Katsuki muttered again as he lied on his bed, though this time the words lacked their usual venom. He slumped onto his bed, the frustration and confusion overwhelming him. He wasn't used to feeling like this, so conflicted, so unsure, so powerless. It was something he never thought he'd feel in his life and he absolutely hated it. The daylight sun filtered through the narrow alleyways as Izuku navigated the quiet streets, his grip tightening on the steering wheel while he tried to keep a low profile, avoiding drawing too much attention to himself. The destination was an aquarium, a strange choice for a shady exchange, but Izuku wasn't in a position to question it. He parked the van a short distance away, the silence of the early morning pressing down on him as he considered his next move. Glancing around the van, Izuku realized he needed something to disguise himself, at least enough to avoid recognition. Just as he was about to search for something, Joey, one of his ever-resourceful minions, handed him a top hat and a pair of shades. "Aka, USO ba," he said. Izuku paused, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "Huh, thanks," he said as he took the hat and glasses. Izuku still couldn't figure out how his minions always seemed to have exactly what he needed at the most convenient times, but at this point, he was just glad for it. There was no time to question the small, peculiar miracles, they were all part of the strange new reality he was stepping into. Izuku adjusted the top hat and shades, catching a glimpse of himself in the rearview mirror. The disguise was simple, almost absurd, but it would have to do. "All right, Joey, Tony, I want you to stay here and watch over this van for me, okay?" Deku ordered, his tone firm but laced with the underlying anxiety he was trying to suppress. Reaching into his pocket, Izuku pulled out a small walkie-talkie and handed it to Tony, who took it with a wide grin. "I'll call you if things go south, or if I need something, or just to check up on you." "Got it?" he asked, ensuring they understood the importance of their task. Both minions nodded enthusiastically. No Pyuad, boss. Joey chimed in, giving a thumbs up. See, Pem Ka Ba, Tony added, his voice filled with confidence. Izuku gave a small smile and nod of approval as Tony eagerly took the walkie-talkie, his tiny hands gripping it like a prized possession. Good, Izuku said, trying to maintain a calm demeanor despite the nerves bubbling under the surface. Just stay alert and be ready. I'll be back soon. As he turned away from the van, Izuku took a deep breath, steeling himself for what lay ahead. The aquarium loomed in front of him, its glass doors reflecting the bright daylight, and as he stepped towards them, he could feel the weight of the mission pressing down on him. This was more than just a simple delivery. This was his first real step into the world he'd chosen, a world that was dark, dangerous, and far removed from the hero's path he once dreamed of. The door slid open with a quiet hiss, and Izuku entered, the cool, dimly lit interior contrasting sharply with the bright, sunny world outside. He approached the entrance casually but cautiously, his eyes scanning the area for any signs of danger. The place seemed deserted, save for a few stray tourists who paid him no mind. Still, Izuku had to keep his guard up. The door slid open with a quiet hiss, and the cool, dimly lit interior of the aquarium greeted him. The air was thick with the scent of saltwater and the faint hum of machinery. Izuku took a deep breath, the scent of saltwater filling his lungs as he ventured further into the aquarium. The faint hum of machinery and the distant sound of bubbling water added to the surreal atmosphere, making the place feel almost otherworldly. He moved cautiously, his eyes darting around, taking in every detail. The dim lighting cast long shadows across the floor, and the flickering glow of the tanks illuminated the path ahead. As he walked past various exhibits, the vibrant colors of exotic fish and marine life swirled behind the glass, but Izuku barely noticed them. His mind was focused, replaying the instructions Jiren had given him over and over again. The suitcase, he reminded himself, was in a storage room somewhere in the back. All he had to do was find it, make the exchange, and get out without drawing any unwanted attention. Izuku found the storage room at the end of a narrow hallway, its door slightly ajar. He took a quick glance around, making sure no one was nearby, then slipped inside. The room was cluttered with various supplies, cleaning equipment, spare parts for the tanks, and other odds and ends. In the corner, partially hidden beneath a pile of old blankets, was the suitcase he'd been sent to retrieve. He quickly made his way over and tugged it out, feeling a sense of accomplishment. The suitcase wasn't particularly large, but it was heavier than he expected. All right, mission accomplished, he muttered under his breath as he brushed off some dust. Just as he turned to leave, a loud thud resonated through the room. Thud, asterisk, ah, Izuku jumped and screamed totally not like a girl and almost dropping the suitcase. His heart raced as he looked around, only to see a massive shark slam against the glass of the tank right next to him. Oh, it's just a shark, Izuku thought as let out a sigh of relief. Oh, you think you're so tough, huh? He muttered, trying to regain his composure. He quickly composed himself and added, yeah, well, I've got a suitcase full of, important stuff. So beat it, fish face. He tried to sound confident, but his voice wavered slightly. The shark responded by slamming into the glass again, causing Izuku to flinch. He hurriedly turned to leave, shaking his head. Talking to a shark? Great, I'm losing it. He muttered to himself. As he made his way back to the exit through the hallway, he flinched in slight pain as he heard his earpiece screech and come to life. Boz, donde nama tu? Hem ka board, ye Tony's agar ta I anama. Izuku's brow twitched in annoyance as he loudly groaned, pressing into his earpiece and lowering his voice. What did I say about staying put and not calling me unless it's important? He hissed. Sorry, Boz, Latu's hungry. Izuku visibly grew more irritated. Hungry? You called me because you were hungry. I swear, the moment I get back there, I'm gonna. Izuku paused as he saw a passing-by family giving him odd looks. Izuku immediately froze, realizing he was speaking a little too loudly for someone trying to stay incognito. The family, clearly taken aback by the sight of a young man seemingly arguing with himself, whispered amongst themselves while keeping a wary distance. Izuku forced an awkward smile, waving his hand dismissively as he tried to play it off. Sorry. Bluetooth issues, he blurted out, tapping his ear as if adjusting an earpiece. You know how these modern technologies can sometimes be, acting up. Ha ha, he lied with a nervous laugh. The family exchanged confused glances but hurried along, giving him a wide berth as they passed by. Izuku sighed in relief, his cheeks flushing red with embarrassment as he quickly turned his attention back to the hallway, picking up his pace. Great, now they think I'm some kind of lunatic, he muttered under his breath, rolling his eyes at himself. He pressed the earpiece again, this time more calmly. Joey, Tony, I'm almost out. Just try not to eat anything yet, alright? A garbled response came through, and Izuku could only shake his head in exasperation. Just keep it together until I get back, he whispered before finally reaching the exit, eager to put this whole awkward encounter behind him. Izuku sighed as he climbed back into the van, immediately spotting Tony and Joey in the middle of a heated tug of war over the radio dial. The two minions were arguing in their usual gibberish, neither willing to let go. Guys, seriously, Izuku muttered, pinching the bridge of his nose in frustration. We've got bigger things to worry about than what music to listen to. Tony and Joey paused, both turning to look at him with wide, innocent eyes. For a moment, there was silence, and then Joey suddenly let go, sending Tony crashing into the dashboard. The van filled with the loud blare of static as the radio crackled to life. Izuku shook his head, suppressing a chuckle despite himself. Just sit tight, okay? We've got a job to do. The minions quickly settled down, nodding obediently as they took their seats. Izuku started the van, glancing at the suitcase sitting securely beside him. This was just the beginning, and despite the chaos, he felt a strange sense of purpose starting to settle in. All right, he said, more to himself than to anyone else. Let's get moving, he said as he set his GPS onto the next stop, the Bank of Evil. Detective Tsukauchi and Eraserhead stood outside the modest apartment, the weight of the situation pressing down on them. The door creaked open slowly as Tsukauchi gently knocked, revealing Inko Midoriya, her face pale and eyes swollen from tears. Mrs. Midoriya, Tsukauchi greeted softly, trying to offer some semblance of comfort with his tone. We appreciate you taking the time to speak with us. Inko nodded weakly, stepping aside to let them in. She didn't even care to question why the police were in her house in the first place as she had too much going in her head at the moment. The apartment was small but tidy, though there was a certain heaviness in the air, a lingering sadness that seemed to permeate everything. They followed her into the living room, where she gestured for them to sit on the worn couch. I'm so sorry about the mess, Inko said, her voice trembling slightly as she sat opposite them, clutching a tissue in her hand. I can't believe all of this is happening. Tsukauchi gave her a sympathetic nod, his expression gentle but focused. We understand, Mrs. Midoriya. This is an incredibly difficult time for you, but we need to ask you some questions about your son, Izuku. Inko flinched slightly at her son's name, but she nodded, bracing herself. I'll do my best to help, but I don't know where he is. He just left me a few hours ago. Tsukauchi raised a surprised brow. A few hours ago, so, he went home just after he blew up his school. Does that mean we were close to catching him? But why did he go home knowing that it was the first place the police would search? He speculated. Eraserhead, who had been quietly observing, leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Midoriya, we're not here to accuse you of anything. We just want to understand what might have led to this. Did you notice anything unusual about Izuku recently? Anything that might explain why he did what he did? Inko's hands trembled as she clenched her fists, her eyes downcast. The room was silent, the weight of her guilt hanging heavily in the air. Finally, she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper, but filled with a profound sorrow. Izuku did it, because of me. Both Tsukauchi and Eraserhead's eyes widened in surprise. That was not at all what they expected to hear. Tsukauchi leaned in, concern etched on his face. What do you mean, Mrs. Midoriya? Had I been a good parent to him, had I not neglected him because of his quirklessness, maybe this wouldn't have happened. maybe he wouldn't have gone down the path he did. Inko explained, her voice guilt-ridden. Tears welled up in Inko's eyes as she struggled to find the right words. I failed him as a mother. Had I been a better parent, had I not neglected him because he was quirkless, maybe none of this would have happened. Maybe he wouldn't have gone down this path. Maybe he still would have wanted to be a hero. The room was thick with the weight of Inko's confession, her words hanging in the air like a dark cloud. Tsukauchi's expression softened as he finally began to understand the depth of the situation. Izuku Midoriya wasn't just a villain who had suddenly snapped, he was a boy who had been slowly, painfully driven to the edge by a society that had failed him at every turn. Eraserhead, too, seemed to connect the dots. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. A quirkless boy with dreams too big for the world he lived in, abandoned by those who should have supported him, pushed into the shadows where bitterness and resentment festered. It was a tragic story, one they'd seen too many times before, though perhaps not to this extreme. Inko shook her head, tears streaming down her face. I saw the pain in his eyes every time he was reminded of what he couldn't do, of the dreams that seemed so far out of reach. I should have done more, should have been there for him, but instead, I let him believe he wasn't enough, that he wasn't worth as much because he didn't have a quirk. She did it. She's finally admitted it and accepted the fact that she had failed her son at every turn. Eraserhead's eyes softened as he listened, his usual stern demeanor replaced by a deep empathy. Mrs. Midoriya, he began, his voice low but gentle, it's clear that Izuku was hurting, and that pain was real. But that doesn't mean this is your fault. The world we live in is harsh, especially for someone like him, but we have to believe that there's still a way to help him. That he can still find his way back. Tsukauchi nodded in agreement. We're going to do everything we can to bring him back safely. But right now, we need your help to understand him better. Anything you can tell us, about his past, his dreams, even the smallest details, could make a difference. Inko nodded weakly, her shoulders trembling as she wiped her tears. Okay, I'll do whatever I can to help. Just, please bring him back. I need to properly tell him that I'm sorry. Eraserhead placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. We'll do everything in our power, Mrs. Midoriya. We'll bring him back. Izuku parked the van a short distance away from the building, taking a moment to observe the area. Just as Jiren had described, the Bank of Evil looked completely unremarkable from the outside, an ordinary, run-of-the-mill bank with a plain facade and a modest sign. It was hard to believe that something so sinister could be lurking behind those unassuming walls. But this was the place, no doubt about it. He adjusted his disguise, ensuring the top hat and shades were still in place before stepping out of the van. His heart raced with a mix of anticipation and nerves as he approached the entrance. This was a crucial step in his journey, and he couldn't afford to slip up. He took a deep breath, reminding himself of Jiren's instructions and the importance of this mission. The package was secure in his hand, and all he had to do was deliver it to Mr. Perkins. All right, just like last time, stay here and keep watch. He ordered his two minions seriously before giving them a light glare. But don't call me about anything unimportant again. Understood, he warned strictly, remembering his embarrassing moment back at the aquarium. His two minions nodded obediently. Izuku reached into one of his pockets and pulled out a pair of bananas. His minions' favorite food, Izuku handed the bananas to Joey and Tony, watching as their eyes lit up with excitement. Remember, he added with a stern tone, only call me if it's an emergency. Otherwise, stay out of sight and out of trouble. The two minions nodded enthusiastically, already peeling their bananas and chattering happily among themselves. Izuku couldn't help but sigh, feeling a mix of exasperation and fondness. All right, he muttered to himself, straightening his top hat and adjusting his shades. Time to get this done. With one last glance at his minions, who were now thoroughly absorbed in their snack of bananas, Izuku squared his shoulders and headed towards the bank. The exterior of this supposed Bank of Evil was as ordinary as any other financial institution, which only heightened the contrast with what lay within. Upon entering, Izuku was greeted by the typical bank lobby, sleek marble floors, polished counters, and the soft hum of fluorescent lighting. It was almost too normal. Keeping his cool, he made his way to the restroom as instructed. Inside, he cautiously inspected the stalls and sinks, searching for any signs of the hidden entrance. Jiren's instructions had been clear. The Bank of Evil was accessed through a secret eye scanner embedded in one of the urinals. After a few moments of searching, Izuku's eyes landed on a slightly out-of-place panel in the wall of one of the urinals. He hesitated only for a moment before pressing the hidden button beside it. A soft whirring sound filled the room as a red light scanned over Izuku's green pupils. To his surprise, the wall in front of him began to tremble and then slid open, revealing a grand entrance bathed in an ominous red glow. Above the door at the end of the hallway, the sign read, "The Bank of Evil," confirming that he had arrived at his destination. The transition was startling. One moment he was in a mundane restroom, and the next, he was facing a hidden, high-tech entrance. Izuku took a deep breath and stepped into the entrance, trying to steel himself for what lay ahead. This was the moment where everything could change, where he would prove to himself that he belonged in this new world of villainy. As he walked down the long hallway, flanked by imposing marble columns, Izuku's eyes were drawn to a series of statues lining the corridor. Each statue depicted All Might in various stages of distress, the exaggerated expressions of struggle etched into the marble. The statues showed the symbol of peace desperately trying to hold up the pillars, his muscles straining against the weight. The final column bore a statue of All Might being fully crushed. Even Izuku couldn't help but gulp, feeling a bit disturbed by what these statues were representing. As the doors slid open automatically, Izuku was greeted by the sight of a lavish yet eerily empty lobby. The room was adorned with dark, polished surfaces and extravagant decor that spoke of wealth and power. Izuku approached the receptionist desk, doing his best to quell the flutter of nerves in his stomach. He cleared his throat and adjusted his top hat, aiming to project a semblance of confidence despite the unease gnawing at him. "Hello, I'm Deku. I was told I have a meeting with Mr. Perkins," he said, using his villain name for the first time, a mix of excitement and trepidation in his voice. The receptionist's sharp eyes briefly scanned his disguise as well as the suitcase in his hand before she offered a practiced, reassuring smile. "Ah, yes, you must be Mr. Deku. Mr. Okuda did inform us of your arrival. Mr. Perkins will be with you shortly. Please, have a seat," she said, gesturing toward a row of plush chairs in the lobby. Mr. Okuda. Oh, that must be Jiren's last name. Izuku thought as he gave a nod of thanks and made his way to the seating area, trying to ignore the way his nerves seemed to tighten with each step. He sank into one of the comfortable chairs, the soft fabric feeling oddly comforting against the tension in his muscles. As he waited, he tried to distract himself by surveying the lobby. The windowless room was a stark contrast to the grandeur of the lobby. It was meticulously clean and organized, the air cool and dry from the air conditioning. Despite the pristine environment, Izuku felt a mounting sense of unease. The transition from the stark, foreboding hallway to this lavish, serene space did nothing to soothe his anxiety. He tightened his grip on the suitcase, trying to steady his nerves. In an attempt to ground himself, Izuku reached into one of his pockets and pulled out the charred remnants of his old notebook. It was the notebook Bakugo had exploded, now bearing a new label, Villain Notebook. He had crossed out the previous title and scrawled the new one with bold strokes. This notebook was more than just a symbol of his past. Now, it was a repository of his new life, filled with plans, concepts, and designs for his villainous endeavors. As Izuku flipped through the pages, the familiar scribbles and sketches offered a rare moment of solace. But then, his mind took an unexpected detour down memory lane, making his mood do a complete 180. A young, bright-eyed Izuku Midoriya, only 5 years old, burst into the kitchen with unrestrained excitement, his tiny hands clutching an All Might action figure. "Mom, I'm going to be a hero one day too," he declared, his voice brimming with enthusiasm as he recounted the latest heroic feats of his favorite hero from a video he'd watched. Inko Midoriya, busy at the stove, barely glanced at her son. Her voice was cold and dismissive, tinged with an unspoken bitterness. "I'm afraid you're not cut out for that, kid. Hero schools can't accept anyone so useless." The young boy's face fell, his excitement evaporating like mist. He looked down at his All Might action figure, the dream of heroism now overshadowed by his mother's harsh words. The vibrant gleam in his eyes dulled, replaced by a shadow of disappointment and hurt. Izuku set his notebook down slightly with hurt visible in his eyes as a pang of nostalgia and sadness washes over him. Why did he remember that moment just now? He didn't know, but it left him feeling unsettled. He rubbed his eyes, trying to shake off the unexpected emotional wave. He was snapped out of it when the receptionist earlier called out to him. "Mr. Deku, Mr. Perkins is ready to see you now." Izuku blinked, refocusing as the receptionist's voice broke through his reverie. He quickly tucked his villain notebook back into his pocket as well as his top hat and shades since he probably won't need it now. With a deep breath to steady himself, he rose from his seat and walked towards the direction the receptionist had indicated. The door to Mr. Perkins' office opened with a soft click, and Izuku stepped inside. Izuku was met with the sight of a large man wearing a formal blue business suit. It was definitely the man Izuku was supposed to meet. Mr. Perkins was seated behind a large mahogany desk, his expression calm and professional. "Ah, you must be Mr. Deku." Mr. Perkins greeted, looking up from a stack of papers. His tone was polite but carried an air of authority. "Yes, that's me," Izuku replied, trying to sound confident despite the residual unease. He approached the desk and placed the suitcase down with deliberate care. "I have a package for you, as instructed." Mr. Perkins nodded and gestured for Izuku to place the suitcase on the desk. "Very well, thank you for delivering this." As Izuku placed the suitcase on the desk, Mr. Perkins' comment caught him off guard. You're a lot younger than I expected," the man remarked, a faint smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Izuku tensed for a moment, unsure how to respond. "I guess I am," he finally said, trying to keep his voice steady. A tense silence filled the room before Mr. Perkins broke it with a heavy sigh. "Let's just get straight to the point, kid. My business is dying. Let me explain." Izuku blinked, caught off guard by the bluntness of the statement. Mr. Perkins continued, his tone sharp. "With the rise of these pro-heroes that society worships, villains today just don't have the same spark. They've lost their edge, their drive. And when villains are on the losing end, businesses like mine suffer. The bank of evil thrives on chaos, on the power struggles that used to be a constant. But lately, the heroes have been winning too much. The great villains who once filled these halls are gone, defeated, or in hiding." Izuku listened intently, absorbing the gravity of the situation. However, one crucial detail still puzzled him. "Wait, what exactly does the Bank of Evil do?" he asked, genuinely curious. Mr. Perkins leaned back in his chair, a knowing smile crossing his face. "Ah, yes, I should have clarified that. The Bank of Evil isn't just a name. We provide resources, information, and support to aspiring villains. In exchange for certain deeds performed, we offer financial backing, cutting-edge technology, and strategic guidance. Our goal is to help you make your mark and cause the kind of chaos that will turn the tide against these heroes." Izuku's eyes widened with interest. The idea of having access to more resources and support was exactly what he needed, especially given his current situation. Mr. Perkins cleared his throat before continuing. "Anyways, my business, and others like it, are in decline," Perkins continued, his voice growing more passionate, "because there's no one left to support, no one capable of turning the tide. But you," he said, leaning forward, his eyes narrowing as he studied Izuku, "I see something different in you. I see that hunger in your eyes, boy. A fire that hasn't been seen in a long time." Izuku felt a shiver run down his spine, the man's intense gaze making him feel both excited and nervous. He swallowed hard, trying to process what was happening. Perkins leaned back slightly, a calculating look on his face. "That's why I'm willing to make you an offer. I want to help you, Deku. I want to give you the resources, the connections, and the backing you need to rise above the rest. Because if you succeed, if you become the villain I believe you can be, then my business will thrive once more. It's a gamble, but one I'm willing to take." Izuku's heart raced as he realized the gravity of what was being offered. "And what do you want in return?" he asked cautiously, trying to keep his voice steady. Mr. Perkins smiled, a dangerous glint in his eyes. All I want is for you to keep that fire burning. Keep pushing, keep challenging the heroes, and don't settle for anything less than greatness. If you do that, the Bank of Evil will be behind you every step of the way. Izuku hesitated, the weight of Mr. Perkins' words pressing down on him. But, why me? He finally asked, the uncertainty in his voice betraying his doubts. You already said you see something in me, but, why me, out of everyone? Mr. Perkins raised an eyebrow, a bit taken aback by the question. I told you, didn't I? I see that fiery determination in your eyes. That hunger to prove yourself. Yeah, but, why me? Izuku pressed, his insecurities bubbling to the surface. For as long as he could remember, he'd been overlooked, undervalued. To him, being chosen for something this significant felt almost surreal, like he wasn't truly worthy of it unless he was forced to prove it. It's not just about what I see in your eyes, Deku. It's a gut feeling, something that tells me you've got what it takes to be more than just another villain. You've got the potential to be extraordinary, to change the game. And that's something I don't see often. Izuku's eyes widened in surprise. But, how did you know? How could you be so sure? Mr. Perkins nodded thoughtfully. You have Jiren to thank for that. He's one of my trusted associates, and when he mentioned you, I knew I had to keep an eye on you. He told me about the middle school incident. Impressive work, by the way, and he vouched for you. Said you were different, special. Izuku blinked, absorbing this new information. Jiren, he told you all that, already. Indeed, Mr. Perkins confirmed. Jiren has an eye for talent, and when he told me about you, I listened. He believes in your potential, and so do I. You've already shown that you're willing to do what it takes, and that's exactly the kind of drive I'm looking for. Izuku hummed in understanding, the pieces falling into place. Jiren's endorsement, combined with Perkins' instincts, had brought him here. And because there was no one else out there having the desire or potential to be a great supervillain. Ah, that makes sense. Perkins leaned forward, his expression serious. Remember, Deku, this isn't just about you or me. It's about shaking up a world that's become too complacent. And I believe you're the one who can do it. So, Mr. Deku, he stood up from his chair and extended his hand toward the young, aspiring villain. Welcome to the world of villains. We, the Bank of Evil, are ready to assist you in any way possible. Izuku smiled with newfound pride and determination settling in his chest as he shook Mr. Perkins' hand. Thank you, I won't let you down. He was so happy. He finally found a place where he belonged. He was finally accepted. After the formalities were done, Mr. Perkins sat back down and unlocked the suitcase Izuku had delivered. Inside was an intriguing weapon that immediately caught Izuku's eye, a sleek, all-white blaster with a yellow handle and trigger. The design was both futuristic and oddly whimsical. As Mr. Perkins lifted the weapon out of the case, Izuku noticed a wistful expression cross the older man's face. Ah, the squid launcher. I remember this, Perkins murmured, his tone filled with a mix of fondness and melancholy. It belonged to my son. Izuku's eyes widened in surprise. You have a son. Mr. Perkins nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the blaster. Indeed, I had a son. His name was Victor, though he preferred his villain name, Vector. Curiosity piqued, Izuku leaned in slightly. Oh, really? Where is he now? The idea of learning from a seasoned villain's son excited him, hoping he might glean some valuable insights. Perkins' expression darkened, his voice lowering. He passed. Izuku's heart sank. Oh, I'm sorry. After a moment's hesitation, Izuku couldn't help but ask, how did he pass? I'm sorry if that's too personal, sir. Perkins sighed deeply, his eyes clouded with distant memories. He died on the moon. Izuku blinked, struggling to process what he'd just heard. He died on the moon. He tried to mask his bewilderment, the bizarre nature of Vector's fate catching him off guard. He had expected a story of a confrontation with heroes, or a tragic betrayal, but dying on the moon was beyond anything he could have imagined. Unsure whether to probe further, Izuku simply nodded, the strange story leaving him with more questions than answers. Izuku, still reeling from the unexpected revelation, quickly straightened up and forced a polite smile. Anyways, I look forward to doing business with you," he stammered, his voice wavering slightly as he bowed formally. Mr. Perkins offered a small, understanding smile, appreciating the young villain's attempt to shift the mood. "Likewise, Deku, I'm confident this will be a very fruitful partnership." With that, Izuku quickly exited the Bank of Evil. Izuku stepped out of the Bank of Evil, feeling a surge of accomplishment and excitement as he was now officially a villain. The sun was dipping below the horizon, casting an orange glow over the city as twilight settled in. He made his way back to the van, his thoughts buzzing with the day's events and the promise of new beginnings. As he opened the van door, he was greeted by the familiar sight of Joey and Tony bickering over the radio, their animated gestures adding a touch of chaos to the otherwise calm evening. Izuku rolled his eyes with a fond smile, shaking his head at their antics. All right, that's enough," he called out, cutting through their argument. "We've got places to be." With his minions reluctantly quieting down, Izuku settled into the driver's seat. As the van rumbled to life, he glanced at the setting sun and then at the road ahead, steeling himself for the next phase of his journey. It was time to head to the location of his new base. Jiren found him. Whatever awaited him there, he was ready to face it with newfound determination and a sense of belonging. Once Izuku arrived at the new base, he was greeted by Jiren, who stood at the entrance of what appeared to be an old, abandoned apartment complex. The building was weathered and crumbling, a stark contrast to the sleek and modern facilities of the Bank of Evil. Jiren's eyes lit up with a mix of approval and amusement as he saw Izuku approach. Well, look who's here. I must say, I'm impressed. You actually made it through the day and handled yourself well," Jiren remarked, handing Izuku a set of keys. Izuku took the keys with a mixture of excitement and nervousness. "Thanks, Jiren. I did my best. What's the deal with this place?" Jiren grinned. "This is your new base. The real fun starts now. It's an underground hideout beneath this old apartment complex. It's got everything you need. Hidden rooms, secure storage, and a lot of space to make it your own. You can also use the apartment complex itself since, well, no one's living or using this place, obviously. So, you do you." He gestured to the entrance of the building, which led to a set of stairs descending into darkness. "Go on, check it out. I think you'll find it's just what you need." Izuku took a deep breath, the weight of the day's events settling on his shoulders but his resolve unwavering. "All right, I'll take a look." As he descended the stairs, the air grew cooler and the sound of his footsteps echoed off the concrete walls. The space was large and empty but had the potential to become a formidable base. Izuku's imagination began to run wild with the possibilities of what he could transform it into. As he descended the stairs, the air grew cooler and the sound of his footsteps echoed off the concrete walls. The space was large and empty but had the potential to become a formidable base. Izuku's imagination began to run wild with the possibilities of what he could transform it into. After a brief but thorough tour of the new base, Jiren clapped Izuku on the shoulder as if he was hanging out with an old friend. "Looks like you've got a lot of work ahead of you, kid. But I've gotta go now. I've got other businesses to attend to." Izuku nodded in understanding. With that, Jiren turned and made his way out of the base, leaving Izuku alone in his new headquarters. The door closed behind him with a soft click, and Izuku was left in the dim light of the underground hideout. The silence of the space was both calming and invigorating. As he stood there, taking in the enormity of what lay before him, a sense of purpose settled over him. The path to becoming a great villain was now laid out before him, and Izuku was ready to make it his own. He pulled out his phone to call Mel, the minion he put in charge of his old base. "Mel, good news. I've found our next home. So tell everyone to get everything ready," he ordered with enthusiasm evident in his voice. Mel's voice crackled back through the line, sounding a bit flustered. Deku. Si, Udo, Pello, Badas da Sopa. Mel's words were rushed, and he seemed to be struggling with how to explain. Izuku's brow furrowed in confusion. What's going on, Mel? I can't hear you clearly," he asked, still not fully understanding their language. Suddenly, Mel's voice was muffled by loud, chaotic noise. The background was filled with boisterous laughter, music, and the unmistakable sounds of a full-blown party. Izuku's eyes widened as he realized what was happening. Back with the minions, they seemed to be having the time of their lives partying while singing along the song they made. It was like they had been at an Irish pub party. Hey, Polly Polo Pappoy, Ula Li Ko Ta Ga, Pa Li Pa Li Pa Li Pa Li Pa Lu Kea Pappoy. The minions had even choreographed their own dance routine, hopping, swaying and even slapping each other's butts to their rhythm. Ulat ku ki ga ni ku ki ga get pp ula pag Kelly. La boss pa ki kollaa. Seems like they got bored the entire day. Aye labat ko ki kola kabe uki sega. They continued to sing. Mel's voice returned through the phone, sounding sheepish and apologetic about the party. Lam, hem mupa kale. Kaplia ipo dozgi bidem to ka bok. Pem muyud because tomak, ye erik ka jot kapi dana. Sorry. Izuku sighed heavily, a mixture of exasperation and bemusement washing over him. Seriously, Mel, I told you to keep things under control. We have a big move ahead, and I need everyone focused. Mel hurriedly replied, Pem sama bano aka ye linda bok da traba rachakas. I'm nobif bito nunu ta mo. Izuku might not have understood every word Mel had said, but he was certain Mel had just promised to get the job done. Thanks, Mel. I expect things to be in order when I get there. No more parties until the job's done, understood. Izuku ended the call and took a deep breath. Despite the chaos, he couldn't help but smile at his minions' usual comical antics. He returned to his van and started to head back to the old base where his minions held at. Back at the old base, the minions were still caught up in their lively celebration. Mel, now visibly more serious and slightly frazzled, took charge of the situation. All right, Tokas, Babata aka. Mel shouted over the noise, waving his arms to get their attention. His authoritative tone cut through the clamor, and the minions started to quiet down. The sudden silence fell upon the room as the minions looked at Mel expectantly. Pem kale ka dag ons da movada, ye pem mo da linda midu metman aka ye in fog. No mas partying re ta jobs pin, ills. Mel's voice was firm, but there was an edge of urgency in his tone as he quickly assessed the situation with them and told what was boss's orders. The minions groaned in unison but quickly set to work, their previous enthusiasm now redirected towards organizing and packing. Mel moved among them with purpose, directing the efforts with practiced ease. He barked out orders, Linda B. Crates Metman. Haga Udo Nothings Isko Titham. Pem Moda Kale Midu Boka Nunu Khan Mr. Deku Vigwab. As the minions bustled about, Mel took a moment to check in with the various groups, ensuring everything was on track. His leadership skills were evident as he managed to balance efficiency with the minions' natural tendency for chaos. Within a short span of time, the raucous party had transformed into a well-organized packing operation. Mel stood back and surveyed the progress with a satisfied nod. Leela's Traba, Tokas, let's Linda Ba Pin, Ye Pen Pem Pudum Kale Tem Zagas. Good job. Mel congratulated them for their swift work, his voice carrying a mix of encouragement and relief. A few moments later, Izuku finally arrived, his expression bright with excitement. The minions instantly perked up at the sight of their boss, their exhaustion turning into eager attention. I've got some great news, Izuku announced, his voice carrying the thrill of his recent meeting. We've secured our new base. It's an amazing underground facility with plenty of potential for us to make our mark. But we've got some work ahead of us. We need to clean up, organize, and get everything set up before we can move in. The minions exchanged glances, their faces falling at the prospect of hard work. They let out a chorus of groans and dramatic sighs, clearly not thrilled about the idea of heavy lifting and cleaning. They acted as if they were a class of teenagers tasked to do some homework on a Friday. Izuku, sensing their reluctance, decided to shift the mood. He took a deep breath and began to speak with a fervor that matched his newfound purpose, remembering that he was now an official villain. But This isn't just about cleaning and moving. This is about finally starting our chapter in our villainous journey. We're going to make our mark on this world. The heroes have gotten too comfortable, and it's our time to shake things up. We'll be planning daring heists, creating chaos, and proving that we're a force to be reckoned with. He smiled confidently at his army of minions. Are you with me? His words had the intended effect. The minions' eyes lit up with excitement, their earlier complaints forgotten. They chattered and cheered among themselves, fueled by the prospect of the villainous adventures that lay ahead. Izuku smiled, satisfied with their renewed enthusiasm. So let's get to work, team. There's a lot to do, but with our combined efforts, we'll make our own base of operations, and we'll be showing the world what the name, Deku, means. The minions cheered once again, their spirits lifted by Izuku's motivational speech. They set to work with newfound energy, eager to begin their new chapter and support their boss in his quest to become the world's ultimate villain. To be continued. I hope you enjoyed this story. Also remember to subscribe and like this video. See you in the next video.